So, no shortage of topics today. And just before we're getting set to go on the air, 5 seconds before we're getting set to go on the air, as I'm sitting here thinking to myself, man, huge news out of Bloomington to discuss. Although if you listen to this program regularly, it's old news. But still a lot to talk about with that. Huge news from Los Angeles last night when it comes to the Pacers. Huge news when it comes to the Super Bowl getting set. Huge news in the Hall of Fame inductions or lack thereof from a Colts standpoint. All of this to talk about, and just before we're about to go on, suddenly the silence in the room, the stillness that takes place when I'm meditating to prepare, as I do each and every day, for a full 8 to 10 seconds before we go on the air. To
meditate or prepare, which one of those are you referencing? Okay.
I just go into Zen, brother. I just come in here.
Brother.
And just, well, yeah, man, I'm all hippified out.
Did you get into my cabinet?
No, but just before we're going on, the silence was broken as if an F-16 flew overhead, with Eddie Garrison dropping this little tidbit of what's on his mind in the calendar of sports for the weekend.
Baseball is back, Jake. Baseball is back. Pitchers and catchers report on Sunday, and I've never been more excited.
I knew that baseball was back because last night in my annual Thursday get-together beer with my buddy Jeff Hester, I said, so what's new since the last time we were hanging out? And he goes, I'll show you what's new. And he slides his phone across to me. Jeff's a diehard Dodger fan. And he purchased tickets for a Dodger game, and he's taking his daughter for her spring break out to go see the Dodgers in Chavez Ravine. And I said, wait a minute. Shannon and I go to a White Sox game every year, and I went to go purchase tickets, and they're not on sale yet. And he said, oh, well, the Dodgers, you can do the pre-sale that they send out to buy the tickets, and that way they're only $110.
Yeah, no kidding.
I said, there's a slight difference between the Dodgers and the White Sox. Good afternoon to you on a Friday. My name is Jay Query. That is Eddie Garrison. It is Query & Company here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan, and plenty to unearth on today's show. For example, if we were going to go chronologically and go backward, we'll begin with the way that the night ended. And it was a fun end of the evening. I love West Coast games for the Pacers. Love them. Because there's something about, like, when your team's playing out west and you kind of think, like, you know, most people have gone to bed and I'm sticking this out, so you feel like this connection, right? And this, like the little kid in you, like sitting around listening to the radio, sneaking it past bedtime, that kind of thing. I love everything about it. And a listener of the show, good dude, and his name really is Elvis King, Elvis Aaron King, true story, it's his real name. He had sent me a message, and we were messaging back and forth for the better part of really the fourth quarter of that game, and it was fun. That's what it's all about, right? Just watching the game and the Pacers coming roaring back after being down 22 early. Pascal Siakam was brilliant for the majority of the game. Benedict Mathurin was great down the stretch. We'll get into it, but it was big for the Pacers to get a second win on the road in this West Coast trip and then trying to close it out against the Lakers in a game that may not have a marquee part of it that we thought was going to be the case. We'll get into that today. Just before that, chronologically speaking, you had the NFL Awards show, and during the NFL Awards show, I watched it specifically because I know that's where they unveil who the Hall of Fame class is going to be. And Reggie Wayne, Adam Vinatieri, obviously, Eli Manning, if you're going with the Colts connection, all, you know, obviously because of his brother Peyton, all in possibility. And a couple of notes here first. Number one, and this is the pot calling the kettle black because I'm as sure about this as I am that today is Friday. There are probably times on the radio when I'm telling a story or I'm doing something or I crack a joke that falls flat or whatever, where people listening are like, well, that's kind of awkward. That's uncomfortable. Listen, I get it. We do 15 hours a week. I'm sure that not every hour is perfect. I'd like for it to be. But is there anything more awkward and uncomfortable oftentimes in those awards show when they bring people on stage that are either not used to being in front of a microphone, Justin Jefferson, or just overall in general, the jokes and the skits are just not funny and people are like fake laughing?
Are we sure it was the awkwardness of being in front of a microphone where he was just hanging out with Snoop.
I think a lot of people think he was hanging out with Snoop, right?
Uh-huh.
Especially with the sunglasses on, and he was out there,
Oh,
right?
I know all about that, Jake. Trust me.
He was out there, right? But the big thing was this, and I thought if we're going back chronologically, that what I witnessed during the Hall of Fame and, unveiling of the Hall of Fame class for 2025 encapsulated the story that came chronologically before it. And let me explain. I'm watching the Hall of Fame or the NFL Awards show specifically to see who gets into the Hall of Fame. And usually they save that for the end, but it was like right at 10 o'clock. So I actually thought to myself, perfect, because now I can go to the Pacer game, right? But I'm watching it, and they say, now it's time to present the class. And the first one they bring out is Jared Allen. Great player, former Chief, former Viking, defensive end, great player. Not a huge surprise. So Jared Allen's up there on the stage, and they present him, whatever. And then the music starts back up again. Dun-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. They say, our next enshrinee in the 2025 class. And the cameraman pans over to an incredibly uncomfortable-looking, not sure what to do, Eric Allen, who's just standing in the middle of one of the aisles. Except for it wasn't Eric Allen. They start talking about Sterling Sharp. Or maybe it was Antonio Gates at that point. But my point being, so now you're saying, oh, okay, well, Eric Allen's in. I can check him off. There's one of the names that's up because he's standing there wearing a tux, starting to walk forward, and then realizes that when they say, like, the Green Bay Packers, he's like, well, that's not me. So he backs up again. I think it was actually Antonio Gates that was the one in that order. I don't know if anybody else caught that. But I thought, if you're doing this big surprising unveil for the viewers and the people around the country of who is the next name that you're going to hear, you probably should tip the camera guy as to who's who, because you then knew that Eric Allen was coming. So the point being, the big surprise when they announced Eric Allen was not a surprise, because if you had been paying attention 30 seconds earlier, you knew that he was about to hear his name called because they'd showed him. Which takes us chronologically to the event before that, which was last night at about 7 o'clock, somewhere in there. Might have even been earlier than that. The national report that the end has come for Mike Woodson at Indiana. And this goes along with everything that we've told you for a couple of weeks now. And if you go back, and Eddie, I'm not sure exactly when, the days all run together to me, but I think it was certainly before the Purdue game. It was before Indiana went on the road for the Purdue-Wisconsin two-step. And I had said at that time, if they go and get beat in these games and they come back to take on Michigan with Dusty May on the sideline, with everything that took place with the Illinois game and the fans chanting, and the Northwestern game with fans that had gone to Chicago in order to watch Indiana and were there and also booing Woodson in that game on the road, and then losing at Iowa the way that, I can't remember the exact order of the games, but losing at Iowa the way that they did. But those two in particular, and I thought they played okay at Purdue, as I've said. But getting blown out of the gym at Wisconsin, getting down 20 early and making really no noticeable adjustments, even before they left on that trip, we had talked about what happens if they go out and they play the part of a possum and they're dead on the road, and they come back home and they play dead at home. What happens with Dusty May on the sideline? And I talked about, starting probably 2 weeks ago, I mentioned for the first time the February game with Alford and Iowa and Mike Davis calling in sick. So all of the footprint was there. If you looked closely at the camera panning over and seeing Eric Allen in the walkway, and I don't mean former Indiana football player Eric Allen, I mean the Hall of Fame player Eric Allen, but if you panned over, if you were paying close attention, you knew what was coming next. And if you were paying close attention with Indiana basketball, you knew what was coming next. And so I'm here to tell you that everything obviously it's kind of like when people kind of give you info sometimes, you kind of write it out to see, okay, so is this a leak test or am I being given legit info? Obviously, the latter. And I don't mean that as a credit to me. I mean it as a thank you to the people I talk to. But nonetheless, as of right now, and these things are fluid, they can change, etc. As of right now, and I'm not saying anything that is earth-shattering, but I am saying this. From the things that I've seen, the people I've talked to, I am absolutely certain in saying that, yes, all of this is credible and all of this is true. This is Mike Woodson's last year at Indiana. We know that for a fact. That is a fact now. Now, that can change. The 11th hour, they go on a run now. They win the national title, whatever. But as of right now, the decision has been made, and the thought process of those in charge has now turned to, we have to get this right in who we go out and get. And then the discussion turns to, who do we go out and get? But before we do that, let me say this. And I want to make this clear again. Mike Woodson was a great player at Indiana University. He was, unfortunately, and at no fault of his, a great player during an odd era, because it is one, as I've talked about, that was sandwiched between two signature eras. The undefeated 76 team, the Isaiah-led 81 team. And I realized that he and Isaiah were together in 80 when they won the Big Ten with Butch Carter and that group, and Ray Tolbert was there. But that got then overshadowed by the fact that in 81, they started out slow, then they got hot. At the time that the 81 team won the national title, 26-9, that was the highest number of losses for a national champion ever, until I believe Villanova surpassed that in 85. And it's been surpassed by since. But what I'm saying is, but that team had the largest margin of victory in the NCAA tournament by average of anybody up to that point. They absolutely steamrolled their way through. So that usurped the Woodson era, as great a player as he was. A top 10 scorer, one of Bob Knight's favorite players of all time. When Woodson took over Indiana, and I almost feel like, as much as Mike Woodson may have failed Indiana, if people want to say it that way, that's an extreme statement, but I'm saying if you're saying that, you could also have a legitimate, logical, educated discussion, and hear me out before people get mad and blow me up or change the station here. You could make the discussion that Indiana also kind of failed Woodson. And the reason I say that is this. When Mike Woodson took that job, and I know he had Thad Matta and Dane Fife, but by mold or by design, the way that it was set up was that Mike Woodson, at the time, this was outside the box. But, man, I've got to give Indiana credit. Think about what they're going to do here. They made, and everybody knows they made an overture to Brad Stevens. They couldn't get Brad Stevens to come. So instead of just like going in the typical coach's search where you look at somebody and people go, I mean, it's cool that he got that job, but we all know that it was the seventh choice, right? Instead of going that route of it, they said, let's go get Mike Woodson, who's coached in the NBA, that can utilize that connection to the NBA to get big-time recruits to come to Indiana, and let's give him the support system. We'll give him Thad Matta. We'll give him Dane Fife. We'll give him guys that have been around the coaching system in the college level, but we'll do it because the mold all along is going to be that he's going to keep the seat warm for 4 years or so, get everything stabilized, get the car back on the road, turn on the cruise control, make sure it stays in the center lane, and then we hand it off to the next guy. Whether that be Dane Fife, I don't think anybody thought that was going to be necessarily Thad Matta, because I think Thad Matta wanted to get into more an administrative role, and then obviously things happened at Butler. But that was the game plan. And then you could make the argument that Indiana didn't have the proper succession plan starting to go in place. You could make that argument, but I don't think that it is a sound one. But I'm saying it for the sake of presenting all angles here. I don't think that's a sound one because, number one, Woodson is the one that got rid of Dane Fife, who probably would have been one of those that would have been in that transition. And number two, I think they allowed things to go too far. And let me explain what I mean by that. In talking to people that are very close to the Indiana basketball program and have been a part of the Indiana basketball program, The one thing that I have heard and talked about with a number of people is that in the beginning, when Mike Woodson first got that job, that Woodson was great. I know people that went down there to go down and go to practice or talk to Woodson or give their opinion or take kids down there, and he was humble, he was appreciative, he was open, he was accommodating, all of those things. And then, and I don't know exactly what it was, but I think it's fairly indisputable at this point to say that at some point, whether it be a year into it or 2 years into it, something changed where Woodson then became more insulated and defiant. And the humility turned into a defensiveness about himself. It doesn't make him a bad person, but it means that in that situation, he was not handling it well. And then when people reached out or had concern or whatever else, I think he pushed back on that as opposed to being open to the criticism, open to the critique. And as that happened, you had then a groundswell first with the fans that were getting restless because they weren't winning with the frequency they wanted. But when you start losing the people on the very inside, that's where things go awry. And in the last, certainly 2 seasons, I think that there is the thought from a lot of people of influence and a lot of people of experience within Indiana basketball that they felt like the kingdom was now being run by a guy with the keys that wasn't still opening the door. He was locking the door instead of keeping it open for other people to come in within the program itself and whittling down the people with which he was giving a glimpse on the inside. And because the wins weren't coming, that eventually got to the point where it was too far gone and beyond repair. And so now Indiana is in the situation where they know that this is the end for Mike Woodson, but the real trick for them and the real storyline here and the real tiptoeing balancing act they have to do is simply this at this point, and that is coming up with and I'm using air quotes. If you're looking on the YouTube chat, and thank you to all those in the break room that are watching, I'm using air quotes here, an amicable departure, an amicable breakup. And the reason for that is simple. If Mike Woodson if you just fire him, he gets $8.5 million, unless it's obviously with cause of some, and that's not the case. I mean, he has not done anything in terms of anything overly non-scrupulous, whatever else. If it's simply a wins and losses or just change of direction of the program reasoning while you are parting ways with Mike Woodson, then he is owed the buyout of $8.4 million. So if you're Mike Woodson, you're absolutely like, I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay right here. They can fire me. I want my $8.4 million. The problem is, if you're Indiana and you come out outright and you say, we're firing him, and in particular, if you do it now when there are still games left to be played, then you run the risk of other coaches that are contemplating the Indiana job, whether you're making a phone call to Ann Arbor or Boston or Ames, Iowa, or Auburn, Alabama, or Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or Waco, Texas, or Oxford, Mississippi. Wherever you're making that call, you want to make sure that that coach, whichever one is the one that Scott Dolson decides is the guy that he wants, and I think we know who that first phone call is going to be, obviously, but you want to make sure that whoever you are reaching out to does not then say, you know what? Look what they did to one of their own. Look what they did to one of their legends. Look what they did to a guy that Bob Knight on senior day in 1995 or 6 said basically said his name first as one of his all-time favorite players. And if they're going to do that to that, then do I want to go into that kind of a hornet's nest? That you have to play it delicately for that reason. And I think that's where they are now in terms of figuring out simply how they amicably depart. And there are all kinds of reports that Woodson at first agreed to it and then said, you know what, no, I'm not going to go down this, I'm not going to go down that easily. etc. I think he finishes the year, and then I think he retires. And that is the best PR way for Indiana to do it. Now, in terms of, and maybe it's a conversation for a later day, but I'll do it now. In terms of who the next Indiana basketball coach is going to be, undoubtedly, I'm here to tell you undoubtedly, as sure as the fact that today is Friday, as sure as the fact that Eddie Garrison's counting down to pitchers and catchers reporting, as sure as the fact that Sting and Billy Joel are set to play at Lucas Oil Stadium tomorrow, and as sure as the fact that Reggie Wayne and Adam Vinatieri have to wait another year before they can find out whether or not they're in the Hall of Fame. With all of that certainty, it is a sure fact that Brad Stevens is the first person that Indiana reaches out to for the obvious reasons. Biggest no-brainer ever. And then it becomes a matter of where you think they may go. Do they prioritize that Scott Drew is from Indiana and has won a national title and been successful? Even though there are always whisperings of the fact of, like, Scott Drew, I don't know, man, like he seems kind of greasy. But it's NIL era, man. The rules are gone now. Rip off the Band-Aid. Let's go, right? Bruce Pearl. Do they look at Bruce Pearl, who's got connection to Indiana that we talked about and wins, absolutely wins? And as I've talked about, when you spend 5 minutes with Bruce Pearl, there's one half of you that is ready to run through a wall and the other half is ready to run to a shower. It's just the way it is. But the dude wins. He's full of energy. He wins. But, is he going to leave Auburn? Got the best team in college basketball, arguably, right now. Got it rolling, right? Been to a Final Four. But does Pearl say, look, Indiana's a job that was always a dream of mine. Let's go. Chris Beard. In the end, Chris Beard, to me, on the list, feels like the one that would be the most ready to take that job. And Chris Beard, to me, again, pro and con here. The con being Chris Beard was involved in a very ugly allegation and arrest when he was at UT, which cost him his job at Texas after he had massive success, been to a Final Four with Texas Tech. Okay? And then the fact that he had and I'm not making light of domestic violence in any way, shape, or form. But does that get offset by the fact that, and I can't remember if it was fiance or wife, but his domestic partner then comes out after the fact and says, you know what, this was actually a misunderstanding. It was blown out of proportion. I don't think he should be charged with this. And the charges are dropped, but he had already been let go from Texas. Do we accept that as being then okay, or are we doing that because, well, he's a pretty good basketball coach? He's now at Ole Miss, and if Ole Miss went through and you would think did their own investigating and decided to hire him, does that mean then that Ole Miss is the one that kind of took that PR hit, and now they are the intermediary, and so you're hiring him from Ole Miss with a clean record as opposed to out of Texas with a sketchy record? The thing about Chris Beard on the pro side is this. The guy can flat out coach, and you're going to hear me say this a lot. Chris Beard checks two boxes, in my opinion, that appease, and this is the real trick here. He's a moderate, if we're going that way, because he's a Bob Knight guy, but he's not an IU guy. He's a guy that loves and admires and cut his teeth underneath Bob Knight and pays tribute to Bob Knight, but at Texas Tech. And so, therefore, he is not a guy that comes in here now all of a sudden and you have to have the same level of appeasement for him because of the fact that, well, he's a legacy. So he kind of checks both boxes there. He lets you get away from that challenge of, always living in the Bob Knight, Indiana realm, but he also does have an admiration for Bob Knight. So he kind of goes, you can kind of straddle both fences with Chris Beard. Then there are other names that we'll talk about over the course of the next couple of months, no matter how long this takes, I guess. I mean, Shaka Smart comes into play. Obviously, you've heard me mention Ben McCollum at Drake, the head coach at Iowa State, TJ with the last name hard to pronounce at Iowa State, who's really good. Mick Cronin. There's all kinds of names that are going to come up, but that's probably discussion for another time.
Olsenberger?
Olsenberger. TJO.
That's right.
Speaking of TJ McConnell last night was one of the players on the floor for the Pacers that when they got down 22 and you know they need energy and then, you start getting it, you always know, as our boss said yesterday, and he's not lying, TJ McConnell and Obi Toppin, two guys that always give you energy off the bench. But Pascal Siakam was really good until the fourth quarter slowed down a little bit. Then Benedict Mathurin comes in, and guess who made big plays for them down the stretch? And broke not one but two different guys' ankles within the same play, Tyrese Halliburton. It was a vintage Pacer win. Maybe they shouldn't have gotten down that deep. We'll talk to the guy that was on the microphone for it from the television side of things. Chris Denari joins us on the other side, previewing Pacers-Lakers and recapping Pacers-Clippers next. Speaking of I can't wait much longer, just got the travel itinerary for the two-step out in Southern California for IndyCar. Looking forward to that. Starting out going to Thermal, which is just outside of Palm Springs, and then Long Beach, which is absolutely my favorite venue, not named the Indy 500 on the series.
When is
Notably, Thermal is, both of those are like end of March, early April. But I love Southern California. I mean, I just love the weather. I love the vibe in general. And I love watching when the Pacers are out there late at night because there's just something about it. It's like being a kid sneaking in past bedtime. And last night it was worth the wait and worth staying up late for because it did not look good early. And then a number of different players, as we talked about, rose to the occasion. On the television call for it last night was Kristen Airy, who joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Bright and early, I'm guessing probably just had his Starbucks coffee out in California. Chris, let's begin with this. You are, you're off to a fast start this morning on Pacific Coast time. The Pacers were not off to a fast start last night. What was different from quarter one to quarter two, where they go from being outscored, I think it was 42-19 at the end of the first, to then or 42-22 into the first to outscoring the Clips 42-19 in the second quarter?
Yeah, good morning. Crazy game. I mean, crazy. I think it was, the second unit came in and they forced some turnovers. And, Indiana really struggled in the first quarter against the Clippers half-court defense. And the Clippers defense has been pretty good this year. And we saw the Pacers struggle a little bit on Tuesday. This team is better offensively if it can get out in transition and get some easy baskets. Takes a lot of pressure off your half-court offense. And so I thought in the second quarter, the Pacers reserves outplayed the Clippers reserves and forced turnovers and got back in the game. I mean, Jake, I looked at last night. The Pacers had a 19-0 run and a 15-0 run in the second quarter, two separate runs that equaled 34-0. And all of a sudden it went from a 22-point deficit to a lead, going into the half. So I just thought that the Pacers also wore them down a little bit, and those three-point shots that the Clippers made in the first quarter, they made 10 of them. They were not falling in the second.
Chris, let's go back also to what I thought was it was a scary incident, and I want to make sure people understand here, from all account that I could tell, totally non-malicious incident. It was just a freak thing. But Miles Turner getting hit in the face or in the head, and then you could tell immediately that he was going to have to go into concussion protocol because he was, you guys noticed it all of a sudden. I think Quinn noticed it. Whoa, he's really wobbling here, and they got him. He was able to walk to the locker room. But if you could, what did you notice after the game from that, or do we know anything more than we did last night?
Well, we don't really know anything more. The good news was when I walked back toward the locker room and Rick Carlisle came out to conduct his post-game presser, Miles was there standing, smiling. I asked him, I said, "How are you?" He goes, "Hey, I'm fine." Now, he'll I don't know all that, transpired back in the locker room and what they had to do. So we'll just have to wait and see in the next, 24 hours. It's an early game tomorrow here. It's a 1 o'clock game, a 4 o'clock start, Indy time. But, yeah, it was friendly fire, if you will. It was Zubats was there, but ironically he got hit in the face, really in the mouth, by Benedict Matherin's elbow. So, the good news is, he was smiling. He looked good when I went to the locker room. We'll just have to wait and see what his availability is for tomorrow.
In terms of availability in the fourth quarter, and Thomas Bryant played well, by the way. I thought that he, to come in and to do what he did, you're playing more extended minutes, obviously without Miles Turner in there. Thought he played well. Maybe would have liked to have shot better early on than he did, but played well. But Benedict Mathurin, to me, was really good down the stretch. Siakam was brilliant the majority of night last night, Chris. But if you could, what were your overall thoughts on Mathurin in terms of why in some games late he is very comfortable being the guy and other times he's maybe sometimes more passive?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I think you have a number of players out there that, are very capable of making shots. And, Benedict is probably one of those guys that can take over a game and create his own opportunities. And the Pacers don't have a lot of those guys. One of those, of course, is Siakam. And I think it's still a learning process for Mathurin. I mean, I said to Quinn during the game, he made a terrific pass to Bryant in the first half when the Pacers were making their run to come back. And I can tell you a year ago he wouldn't have made that pass. So it's still a learning curve for a young guy. But, it was good to see him out on the floor because if you think back to start this road trip, go back to Monday, it was Aaron Nesmith that was out there that was really in a closing situation. For Rick Carlisle, he really has no definitive plan as far as who's going to man that forward position as a closer. You know that Siakam's going to be out there. You know that Halliburton's going to be out there. You know that Nembhard's going to be out there. But, Benedict Mathurin was doing what he needed to do on both ends of the floor, and that's why you saw him in a closing position last night. And the other thing that he does, Jake, and he did well in that fourth quarter, is he gets to the free throw line. And that's something that Indiana really needs, especially down the stretch, and they were able to get that from him last night.
Chris Denari is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Last night, Pacers and Clippers, big win for them. Now going into the Lakers, and Chris, it looks like, this was a game that Indiana probably was thinking or strategizing perhaps of what they would need to do with Luka Doncic on the floor. Now, late word that may not be a possibility because may not be the case because J.J. Redick may wait until Monday for Doncic's debut with the Lakers. How does the team go about that, having to plan basically two different ways?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Jake, especially you're dealing with Luka Doncic, and how does he fit with LeBron James? I mean, LeBron last night, 42 points, a near triple-double as they beat Golden State. I think that the basketball world is waiting to see those two guys play together. LeBron has long admired Doncic. Doncic has always said that LeBron's one of his favorite players, and now they're going to be teammates. So, yeah, it does create how do you prepare for Luka Doncic with LeBron James when you've never seen them play together? So it'll be interesting to note. It does seem like the tea leaves are saying it's more apt that he'll play Monday than tomorrow. But they flex the game to ESPN. ESPN we'll have the telecast two places you can watch tomorrow. It's our second game on Channel 13 WTHR. It'll be our FanDuel telecast on FanDuel Sports Network and WTHR. But they flexed the game to ESPN because they felt like Luka was going to play. So we'll just have to wait throughout the day. They don't have to announce anything until tomorrow. But who knows? We could see Luka Doncic on the floor tomorrow. It is ironic, Jake. A number of years ago, we were here to play the Lakers, and that's when Kobe Bryant announced his retirement. So the Pacers have been at Crypto.com Arena for two major announcements, if you will. Kobe Bryant announcing his retirement, and to see if Luka Doncic will wear his uniform with LeBron James tomorrow.
Chris, lastly, Chris Denari, our guest. I'm assuming that you guys essentially flew in from Portland, probably went hotel, arena, hotel, and have not gone out a lot. I'm strictly curious of this. If you have, can you see, or I've not been to, obviously, L.A. since the wildfires took place there, and I have no idea how visible it is or how widespread it is. Have you had any chance at all to see around the area, like from the buses and the things that you guys have been going from one place to the next?
No, we have not, because we're a little bit south, and we're not that far away, I guess, from where the fires were in Pacific Palisades, but we're in Santa Monica. So when we flew into LAX, we bussed to Santa Monica, and then the new arena into a dome is not far from LAX, right in Inglewood, right close to SoFi Stadium and where the old the Great Western Forum is or was. So no, we have not seen anything like that. The irony is, Jake, when we flew in on Wednesday after we spent the night in Portland on Tuesday, it was pouring down rain. And, a lot of us were saying, isn't it too bad that, this rain wasn't here, in the last month when you had all those fires. So, no, we have not seen any of the devastation. We're a little bit to the south of that. but again, it's not that far away.
Pacers and Lakers coming up, and then back home taking on the New York Knicks. That is Tuesday or Wednesday when they come back here?
Tuesday. It's on TNT.
Yeah, it's a back-to-back Tuesday, Wednesday. Tuesday's a TNT game, so we won't have the telecast. And then the Pacers will fly after the game that night. We'll go to D.C. and play the final game before the All-Star break against the Wizards on Wednesday.
And, Chris, another opportunity for folks that may not be able to see it from the cable standpoint to watch the Pacers on WTHR locally, correct?
Yes, tomorrow, 3:30 pregame, 4 o'clock tip. It will be on WTHR tomorrow.
All right, Chris, appreciate the time. Take a nap because I know it's early over there in the Pacific Coast, but appreciate the time and look forward to talking to you. We will certainly see you back here when you come back for the homestand after the trip out west.
All right, thanks, Jake. Thanks, Eddie.
All right, Chris Denari joining us, Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Last night, bit of a surprise, perhaps, and disappointment for one guy that lives here part-time. We'll explain, and actually probably two guys, but certainly one of them. We'll get into what happened last night at the NFL Awards show next. Thanks to Chris Denari. Last night at the NFL Awards show down in New Orleans, I mean, it is cool, and certainly that theater was awesome. But, Eddie, you watched how much of it last night?
I watched a little bit of it while we were doing pregame coverage last night. Had it on the TV over here, and saw a little bit.
You know, I mean, Snoop is a good host for it, right? Because he's universally beloved, and he's got a good sense of humor, and he did a good job. But, like, just maybe I'm just old.
I'm never going to call anyone old because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but if you're going to call yourself old, Jake.
Older than you, how's that?
Yes. And plus, my dad listens to the show, and he knows he's around the same age as you, so if I call you old, then I think my dad's going to take it that I'm calling him old, so
fair enough.
I got to be careful.
But any show, any awards show, whether it's the Oscars, and the Oscars have people that legitimately, like, you know, are actors and actresses for a living, right? Although I guess now, isn't everybody an actor? Is that what we're supposed to say now? I have no idea.
I mean, you're an actor, Jake, aren't you?
I am. Every day. I have to come in here and act like I enjoy your company
I
from
was about
12
to
until
say
3,
that's
right?
what you were about to say.
But any of these shows, Grammys, Oscars, Tony Awards, the Emmys, the Primetime Emmys, and then these sports shows, when they bring people up on the stage and they've got to do like these little skits or they try to be funny and make jokes, it is invariably terrible. Like, is it not hot face moment? That's what I call it, a hot face moment. Like when you were in school and they had somebody have to go up and read in front of the class, and it was somebody who wasn't a great reader, or they were nervous and they're stumbling and you feel bad for them, so you're staring at the floor and your face gets hot. Like, there are just hot face moments, right?
I think they're more funny with how bad they are.
But like the awkward laughter from people when Snoop came out and said, "Hey, everybody's reading a book," and I guess the payoff was supposed to be like, you know, Deion Sanders is reading his own book, and isn't that hilarious? But of course, they had to call him Coach Prime because they can't call him Deion Sanders or Coach Sanders. It's got to be Coach Prime. And, you know, and they made a joke about Bill Belichick's girlfriend, which I guess was funny, right? I mean, but at the same time,
About Snoop being a longer NFL fan than
she's been alive.
Yeah.
But I think most people were like, oh, like, well, and then they zoomed in on her, and people were like, well, I get it. Okay.
She's 24.
Is that how old she is?
Yes.
Yeah, that is uncommon.
He is 72.
Yeah, remember we had that discussion. What if there is an 18-year or a 15-year age difference between two people in a relationship? What is the youngest age that the younger person can be where, like, it doesn't societally look weird? 24 and 72 would not fall into that category, right? I mean, kidding aside, because she's an attractive girl, but it's like, well, what is going on? I mean, yeah, it's a little uncomfortable. But the Hall of Fame, though, then it comes down to announcing the Hall of Fame class. And one of the things that I, like many people, I think, just was most stunned by, and we'll talk to Kevin about this coming up. Kevin Bowen going to join us at 2 o'clock. I didn't understand why there's just 4 people. I thought personally, and guilty as charged. Guilty as charged. I thought that it was 5 people would get in.
I mean, we had this exercise. You and I did it.
But
and
I realized
had 7. Zach Kiefer had 6.
Correct. But this is the smallest class since, and they said the year. So it's not unprecedented. So I should have known that. It's not unprecedented that fewer than 5 get in. But when you look at that list, I thought, and I get it, there are certain guys that when you look at it, you say they're not going to get in on their first ballot because you want first ballot Hall of Famer to mean something, right? You know, the best Hall of Fame story is that of Mike Chappell. And if you're unfamiliar with the process of the Hall of Fame, this is how it works. The Pro Football Writers that vote on the Hall of Fame have a meeting or a conference call or, you know, Zoom or whatever it may be, but they all gather, and for each candidate, there is a media writer that was a beat writer that covered that player's majority of career that then spells out the case for the player. And they don't say it in the form of like, listen, guys, I'm begging you to. They just say, here are the credentials of Torrey Holt. He played, and I'm not looking at his stats, so I'm just throwing out. You know, he played 11 NFL seasons. He won a Super Bowl. He led the league in receiving yards in 3 consecutive seasons or whatever the numbers may be. They just spell that out, and then everybody votes. Peyton Manning, when it was Peyton Manning's year of eligibility, and Mike Chappell was the designed beat writer that was assigned to spell the case and the stats and the argument for Peyton Manning, they said, and now here to discuss the case of Peyton Manning, Mike Chappell, beat writer for the Indianapolis Colts. Mike? And Mike Chappell said, and I believe he said, I think he did say freaking, but he said, like, it's Peyton freaking Manning. Mic drop. And that was it. That's all I had to say. And boom, he was in.
See, that's fascinating to me. That Manning has the split Denver-Indy.
I think it's majority. It's the person that does the because Manning, obviously, majority here,
Yes.
right? Totality here. So it would be, and did Torrey Holt play anywhere other than the Rams? Do you know? I mean, I know that he was obviously majority. And so
Yes, he did.
Where else did he go?
Jacksonville for 1 season.
Yeah, see, so it would be Jim Thomas, I think is his name, that is from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, that was the longtime Rams beat writer during Torrey Holt's era. He would be the one likely that is giving the case for him. But yes, there are, Eli Manning is an interesting case because, like I talked about yesterday, Eli Manning has arguably the greatest Reggie Miller forever. Reggie Miller, at the time of his retirement, I believe had the highest increase of scoring average between regular season and postseason of any Hall of Famer. His scoring average increased, 7.5 points or whatever it was. So he was known as the clutch performer, right? I mean, obviously. Eli Manning may have the greatest differential of quarterback rating between average regular season games and Super Bowl games or Super Bowl runs of anybody. I mean, he had some remarkable playoff runs. But in the regular season, for the majority of his career, he was a fairly pedestrian quarterback, truth be told. But he also, Eli Manning, his last name is Manning, football royalty. And you could certainly argue the case that Eli Manning, in his post-playing career, has become almost a more beloved and famous figure central to the game of football than he was as a player. And so I thought there was the possibility. Is Eli Manning a first ballot Hall of Famer? On paper, no. But in status, perhaps. And I thought that might have been enough to actually push him over the top. But either way, Reggie Wayne, Adam Vinatieri, in Vinatieri's case, first ballot, and I understand why from a kicker standpoint, maybe they said, you know what, there was always an aura about Jan Stenerud being the only kicker in there. We're not going to put him in first ballot. Okay. Reggie Wayne, though, now, I mean, the log jam, that's the problem. Now the log jam gets even more so. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at the eligible players for next year, and you look at those that next year are going to be eligible, then you say, okay, then the wait may become even longer. And I'll tell you who a couple of those players are, because that'll probably be one of the things that we will discuss with Bob Kravitz, who's going to join us on the other side. We'll get into the Indiana discussion as well. Friday edition. Happy early weekend to you here. Query & Company on the Fan. 1 o'clock hour underway in Indianapolis. For that matter, the 1 o'clock hour is underway everywhere in the Eastern time zone. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison, the other voice you hear on this program. We call it Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5. The Fan. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line, the guy that I have always said is probably the most plugged in terms of versatility, writer and media member in Indianapolis, bobkravitz.com, where you can read his Substack column. Bob, we'll begin with, and I want to get into the Hall of Fame with you as well, and how the traffic might have gotten pretty busy here for Reggie Wayne and Adam Vinatieri. We'll get to that. Let's start with the Mike Woodson situation. I want you to tell me if you agree with this statement or if you think it's off base. I feel like the Mike Woodson situation is one that if you go back and look at when he was hired, if there had been some sort of a succession plan, I could see that. But it felt like Woodson's isolation of himself combined with the fact that there wasn't really like any sort of that succession plan that was going to this point got them now to the point of this very uncomfortable no return, because it's almost like Indiana got out the plates and the vacuum cleaner and Mike Woodson still didn't realize it was time to leave the party. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I thought, when they hired Thad Matta and Dane Fife, I thought a succession plan, I thought he was going to be like Biden. He was going to be the bridge,
right?
To the next generation. And it turned out that it was very Biden-esque, actually, instead of Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama going into the office and telling him it was over, this time it was Scott Dolson and quite likely some of the IU trustees and the president. I thought there was a neat succession plan in place. Why things fell apart with Mata and particularly Dane Fife, I don't know all the details, but I thought it was set up nicely. But they're making the right move now. There's no question. This has been over for well over a year, in my view.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, listen, I think once he got in there, Mike Woodson, quite frankly, kind of enjoyed, as his golf outing declared, being the king of Indiana. And basically he's like, you know what? I kind of like being the captain now, so I'm good. And said, It's nice of you guys to come on board, but your office is down the hall. Seems that way, right?
Yeah, it did. I just, it's funny. I was rooting for Mike because I went to school with him. We actually took a class together. I always root for the older guys like Signetti. I saw Mike as a guy who could run off to Florida and play golf and drink wine and smoke cigars. And instead, he came back and tried to bring back the glory to old IU. And unfortunately, it was a major failure.
Well,
and now they've got to move on.
Bob, isn't part of that because part of the job he did at IU was golf and drink wine and smoke cigars?
I don't know. I've heard that certainly, but I don't know for a fact that he didn't put the effort into it. I would feel very uncomfortable saying that. He did not seem fully engaged, though. When you talk to him on the rare occasions that we talked to him, in between games or after games, he just didn't seem to have his finger on the pulse, let's just say.
I think, to me, Bob Kravitz, our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line, the thing now, Bob, that becomes interesting, and we can sit here and go till the cows come home about what went down, and the bottom line is this. I think you and I can agree on this. That yes, I have heard, we've talked about it on the show for 2 weeks now, that the end was here, and now it is emphatically clear that he is not going to be back next year. It is simply a matter now of figuring out how you gracefully part ways here. And Mike Woodson kind of has that leverage, does he not, Bob? Because Indiana's got to be careful to not present for whoever their next coach is going to be the perception of just immediately dispatching and disregarding a legacy guy, because if they do that to him, what are they going to do to me when you're trying to recruit somebody in? You agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've got to do this the right way. I think the right way is telling them, look, Mike, let's announce that you are retiring at the end of the season. You're 67 years old. The modern landscape of college football does not lend itself to 67-year-old men trying to beg with 17-year-old little, young boys. They can do it in a graceful way. I mean, everybody knows it's a fiction. Everybody knows he's getting fired, including Mike. But there's a way to do it so he can walk out with, a shred of dignity, a lot of cash, and maintain his high standing in Bloomington as a guy who is a great, great player.
Is Brad Stevens the only candidate that does not have any demerit side to it?
Boy, I tell you what, that's the perfect pick. And to me, there's three people. I mean, there's really more, but to me, it's Dusty Make, Brad Stevens, and Chris Beard.
Yep.
To me, those are the three most obvious. I thought that Chris Beard. I was reading a story. They won a game the other night, and he was talking ad nauseum about Bob Knight and growing up as a coach under Bob Knight and Pat Knight, and it sounded like a bat signal to IU to me, like, hey, don't forget me. Now, there are a lot of good other people. I don't know if they would ever leave. I don't know if any of those three guys would come here. I'm sure they would, but, I mean, I'm sure Beard would in a heartbeat. But, T.J. Otzelberger, heard Rick Pitino's name bandied around. I don't think that's it.
Otzelberger's at Iowa State, for those unfamiliar, right? Done a good job.
Yeah, Otzelberger's done a phenomenal job at Iowa State. So, I mean, there are some other guys out there who I think have a lot of merit, but those to me are the top three.
And by the way, Bob, when I said that Stevens is the one without demerit, I guess if there was a demerit for Stevens, it would be the same for Dusty May. To me, Dusty May, the only demerit, maybe you could say, and I think what he's done this year at Michigan shows that, there are a lot of people that would be like, I don't know, FAU, like, was that just kind of a fluke run with a good player? No, he clearly can coach. The question just simply becomes, would he leave a good situation in Michigan, which is a good program, obviously, right? But let's go back to Chris Beard. Beard, as I talked about earlier, is a guy that had an arrest. Oh, what's the doggie's name, Bob? I'm a big dog fan.
It's a little dog named Espo after Tony Esposito, and he wants to be on the radio.
I like that. Nothing wrong with that, man. Do you have a dog voice, Bob? When you talk to Espo at home, do you have a dog voice?
Stop shitting in the house. That's my dog voice.
Okay. Fair enough.
I'm sorry. I can't say that on radio. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
FCC violation.
Good thing I have quick reflexes.
just be glad I have fast reflexes, right, Eddie? All right, Bob. So, Chris Beard, back to that. So he had obviously the situation at Texas with an arrest for domestic violence, and I don't recall. My apologies if it's fiance or wife, but the woman in the situation after the fact then came out and said, they dropped the charges because she said this was blown out of proportion. It was a misunderstanding. Right. I'm not making light of any of that. Ole Miss theoretically would have done their homework on that and gave him an opportunity at Ole Miss. To me, if you decide to go with that, and I guess a two-part question. The first would be, is that something that Indiana would be able to take on? And then secondly, does he check two boxes? Because to me, it's the perfect balance. He's a Bob Knight guy, but he's not an IU guy. And to me, those are two really big things in his favor, those last two.
Yeah. Yeah, look, the first thing with the domestic violence, I'm not diminishing or minimizing that by any stretch of the imagination. But, the charges were dropped, and you can say what you want to say about the situation, but none of us are there. None of us know what happened between two adults. It's obviously reprehensible if he put his hands on her. But I'm not comparing mistakes, but they hired Kelvin Sampson many years ago after clearly being a guy with cheating issues. So I don't have a problem with them going after Chris Beard. I really don't. As far as he spent a lot of time with Coach Knight. He spent a lot of time with Pat Knight. I've dealt with him a couple of times in Final Fours and NCAA tournaments. I think he's the right guy. I think he'd be completely bought in. I think he would change the culture. I think he'd be perfect. He does have that spot on his resume, and they will have to acknowledge it and address it. But I don't think that should make him a guy who's ineligible for the job.
Brad Stevens is the first phone call, though, right, Bob?
Yes, Brad Stevens. Got to get him on speed dial just to see, just to kick the tires. He may be perfectly happy. He's got a young family. They're established in Boston. He's a legend in Boston, and he's always going to be a legend for putting up another banner. But maybe this is still that dream. We don't know, and they won't know until they reach out to Brad Stevens and ask.
Bob Kravitz, our guest, Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, bobkravitz.com, where you can read his Substack column. All right, Bob, let's get to last night. Reggie Wayne, Adam Vinatieri, which one more surprised you?
Adam Vinatieri. I thought, you look at Morton Anderson. I think Morton Anderson was a first ballot guy. I'm pretty sure if Chap is listening, he can text me and tell me I'm full of crap.
He was the all-time leading scorer of the NFL. I mean, when at that time, maybe that does it, right? Obviously, but then you know what? So is Vinatieri now, right? So
yeah, Vinatieri is now. So that surprised me a little more. And it's not like there's a log jam of kickers who are trying to be inducted. I just think, it goes to show how the voters view specialty guys, specialists. It just takes longer, Ray Guy. It just takes, longer, or it's harder for guys who are specialists to get into the Hall of Fame. Reggie's going to get in, man. It's just going to be a matter of time.
Okay.
I know we've been saying this forever, but
here's my concern for Reggie. Okay.
Okay.
And by the way, I just looked this up. Morton Anderson was first eligible in 2013. He was a finalist in 14 and 15, and then was inducted in 17. So maybe that gives a roadmap there. But when you look at of the players that were just finalists, okay, Reggie Wayne, Adam Vinatieri, Torrey Holt obviously was in there, and I think there were a lot of people that thought that Torrey Holt had a chance to get in. Steve Smith, if you were looking at receivers. The problem then becomes, Bob, if you look at next year, let me give you a couple of names that are eligible next year, and you tell me if you think they would prioritize over, we'll start with Reggie Wayne. Okay, Drew Brees.
Yeah.
He's in, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Larry Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
Frank Gore.
No.
Okay. Maurice Pouncey.
I would say no, but he was a hell of an offensive lineman. But
he was.
I have to do a little more research on that.
Okay, Phillip Rivers.
No, not first ballot.
Okay, the problem though becomes those guys now. You're right. I mean, Rivers, I agree, not first ballot. Gore probably not first ballot. But those guys now are, while you're sitting waiting in traffic, now all of a sudden they're merging in, and there's only so many spots to get over before the exit ramp, right?
And the problem too is, with wide receivers, the way the game is played now, everybody's putting up such numbers, that it's hard for guys who played in Reggie's era to compare. I mean, Reggie's 10th all time, and I think catches and yards or something. But by the time he gets looked at in the coming years, that number is gonna diminish. He's gonna be lower on the list. So there's a log jam there, and I'm not sure how you break that up.
It feels a little bit, Bob, like Stallworth and Lynn Swann. Lynn Swann was the acrobatic receiver for the Steelers. Stallworth had probably the more longevity of his career and was the tougher catches guy at times. But Stallworth had to wait a lot longer than Swam because there's an optics that go there. And then I think you become penalized.
Taylor, the 49ers.
What's that?
John Taylor,
Exactly.
the 49ers.
Right. So because you somewhat get – is Reggie Wayne being penalized because people look at it and go, well, yeah, but he played with Marvin Harrison and Peyton Manning, so that's why he had numbers. There's
no question. I mean, there's no question. People look at that and say, well, they had to put all the defensive pressure on our attention on Marvin. He had Peyton throwing him the ball. Peyton made everybody look good. So yeah, that's definitely. I think I don't know what the voters are thinking, but I have to think that they look at him very much in the same way they look at a John Taylor or a Stallworth. I mean, I think I think those are those that makes sense.
Bob, who wins Sunday? Chiefs, Eagles.
I got the Eagles, baby. That's how I'm betting.
Is that your East Coast bias?
No, it's not my East Coast bias. I just look, it's hard to bet against Mahomes and Kelsey and all them. I just think they're going to run the hell out of the ball and keep Mahomes off the field. I think the Eagles are going to have their way, and they've got a terrific defense. The only thing I worry about is Philadelphia plays a lot of man-to-man, and Mahomes is going to run. Mahomes is going to get his on the ground. So if you're looking for a prop bet or something, whatever Mahomes over-under is on rushing yards, man, I take that in a heartbeat.
Like Mahomes is one of those, every time you think you've got him, he's the most frustrating player to – I mean, he's a great player, right? But if you are rooting against him, he's the most frustrating because every time you think he's down and out and boom, makes a play.
Yeah, he's like Michael Jordan, I mean, I've seen he's the Jordan of football right now, and yeah, you think you've got him dead to rights, and he pulls something out of his behind.
If they win Sunday, Bob, does Mahomes absolutely cement himself in front of Manning as on the greatest all-time list, or did he already do that?
I think so. Well, he's already won 3, right? So. Yeah, I think he does. And I think the only guy he's chasing, at this point,
Brady,
so young, is Brady. I mean, I think that's the only guy left for him now. Granted, Staubach and Elway, they won, numerous Super Bowls, but this guy's right there, and this team's not going anywhere for a long time.
Bob, you did write about Mike Woodson, and that is available right now on the column, correct?
It is, sir.
All right. Anything else in the works in terms of that, or you just keeping an eye on the Indiana situation?
I'm just keeping an eye on the Indiana situation. I've heard there might be a press conference, there might be an announcement. I'm just kind of hanging out, watching CNN and waiting for some word to come down.
There's rumor that that's a lot of what Mike Woodson does too. Now, Bob, just out of curiosity, do you believe? We'll end with this. Do you believe that Mike Woodson will be the coach for Indiana on their final game of this season?
I do. I think he'll finish. I think he'll finish out the season. They'll let him go. I mean, what purpose does it serve at this point to put Kenya Hunter or Caliber Chaney or whoever a couple of seats down on the bench? It serves no purpose. And the truth of the matter is, if you look at Woodson's record, they've finished strong the last couple of years. Now, will they this year? I mean, they've lost 6 out of 7. They look completely befuddled. The schedule is brutal here in the next couple of games. I don't think that they will, but there's reason to believe, at least in the past, that Woodson's IU teams tend to come on late in the season. So we'll see. Wouldn't it be crazy if they go on some miracle
the
run?
0-2 Final Four run?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Final Four run. Like Steve Fisher taking over for
Bill Frieder.
Michigan.
Yeah.
Bill Frieder, right.
Jim Beckler said, no, we got our Michigan man. It's Steve Fisher. We're going to go with him. You go ahead and go to Arizona State. Bob, what class did you have with Mike Woodson, by the way?
I don't remember. I think it was a history class of some sort.
All right, fair enough. All right, well,
Yeah.
we will see exactly when Mike Woodson might be history in terms of his coaching career at Indiana, but we'll keep an
There
eye
you
on it.
go.
Appreciate it, Bob, as always.
All right. Take care, guys.
Bob
Thank you.
Kravitz with Espo on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Now, those that were listening on the stream say your reactions aren't fast enough, Eddie, but that's because the dump button doesn't work on the stream, correct?
Yes, the stream audio pulls different from the regular radio audio, and apparently I may not have been quick enough for that, but we'll see.
You were Johnny on the spot, I thought.
I thought I was too.
I mean, at this point, you can say that word on the radio, can't you? Probably not, right?
Probably not.
Seems like the rules have changed on a lot of things. What was the best class you took in college? What was the class you took in college you most enjoyed, and the class that, how about this? The class you took in college that you thought was going to be like an easy A, and you're like, whoa, not the blow off I thought it was going to be.
The problem I have with answering that question is I transferred in a good amount of college credits, so I got done with most of my prerequisite courses, so I could finish a semester earlier. The easy answer for that would be one of my history courses, just because I thought it'd be fun, but the professor was boring and he made it really hard to go in there.
Okay.
Every
History of what?
It was prior to the Civil War, United States history before the Civil War. I think was the course.
Okay. There was a class at IU called the History of Rock and Roll, and everybody took it because it was like, oh, this is a cool class, right? And then it turned out to be a little bit harder than people thought. And the guy that taught it, it was a Tuesday, Thursday class, but people figured out that, like, basically, and I take it back, it was a once-a-week class. He taught it Tuesday up here in Indy, Thursdays in Bloomington. And people figured out, wait a minute, he's giving the exam on Tuesday in Indy and Thursday in Bloomington. So I knew some guys that paid a dude, just like some guy we went to high school with that didn't go to college.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, can you go on Tuesday afternoon at like 1 o'clock and just walk into this lecture hall with like 300 kids that are taking a test and get the test and then just wait, like, you know, till everybody's starting to turn stuff in, and then just put it in your pocket and walk out and then drive down here and, like, you know, we'll buy your beer for the night or whatever, and we got the exam. And so they did that like twice, and then during the final, the professor figured it out, locked the door, and was like, there's somebody in here that's stealing the test and driving it to Bloomington. So look around and see if there's anybody in here who – so he eventually tried to make a dash for it, and police chase ensued.
Oh, really?
All over the history of rock and roll.
And then to answer your other question, the course that I found the most fun, we had a basketball class, and it was not just your typical, oh, these are the rules and this, that, and the other. You had to create like a whole plan as if you were starting your own basketball program at the collegiate level. Of course, this is pre-NIL, so you had to create what kind of offensive system you'd want, defensive system you'd want, how you would go about a college visit of bringing a player on campus. It was really fun.
I mean, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So at IU in Bloomington, the class that everybody would try to get was human sexuality. And the first day of it, it was like, literally, it was like you were walking into the Hustler store and everybody's like, dude, this is unbelievable. And then you found out it was actually a legitimate, like, biological, scientific class. And it was way harder than anybody thought. And everybody's like, whoa, wait a minute. I didn't sign up for this. I took a class on the history of bluegrass music.
Oh,
it was awesome. Lotus Dickey was a great bluegrass musician in the area from Southern, but that was a great class. I took a class on the history of presidents in the press. That was my all-time favorite. Professor Juergens in Bloomington was amazing. Loved that class. And then what foreign language did you take, Eddie?
didn't have to take one because I tested out.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
What did you take in high school that you tested out of?
Espanol.
That's impressive. You got, let me tell you something, you got saved because foreign language at the college level and foreign language at the high school level, not even comparable.
Oh, yeah.
You go in and by like day 2, they're fluent, and you're like, what is going on here? So that's why I had to take Spanish, then I had to take a second foreign language. Started with French. They were literally like, by day 2, they were speaking fluent French. It was all a bunch of kids that basically, I think the whole class was from Montreal. So I dropped that, started with Bambara, which is an African clicking language. The grad student that teaches it, shall we say, had some problems with his paperwork. And after a couple of weeks, he disappeared. So then I took Swahili. And as I have talked about on the morning show before, I was fluent in Swahili until about 1998 when I forgot it all. And I also, when I was in New York City and was an intern in New York, I learned that it actually, not every cabbie they don't speak Swahili in all of Africa, just in certain countries. So whenever I would get in a cab and it was an African cab driver, I would say like, do you speak Swahili? And half of them thought it was awesome, and the other half were totally offended. And then I realized that was an incredibly inappropriate stereotype, perhaps by me, right? Totally inappropriate stereotype. Pacers last night, strong performance. And a strong performance by a couple of guys that maybe don't show up in the box score, the old saying says, but help them get a win. We'll discuss that. Kevin Bowen joins us coming up 2 o'clock here. And then it's a Good for the Heart, Feel Good Friday. We bring that back for 2025. I'll let you know about that. That's about an hour from now. Uh, I'm sorry. Do I hear something, Eddie? Do I feel the fluttering of a small breeze here in the studio? Is it the ticket fairy who just came by?
I was about to say, I don't think it's Robin. I didn't hear the.
It is not Robin the Genie, no. I believe that's the ticket fairy, is it not?
Perhaps it is, Jake.
That must mean that we have tickets to give away.
We do have tickets to give away.
Here's how I think we should do this.
Okay.
As you know, we like to give
program.
away tickets from time to time by just simply allowing people to call into the program. But at the same time, there are times where I like to do it with a little bit of fun interaction to make sure that it's somebody that's listening to the show actively. And so if that's the case, then I like to do from time to time a little show trivia, right?
Yes.
Where we ask a trivia question, see if somebody knows the answer that proves that they have, at some point been listening to this show. Now, if you're asking, by the way, well, Jake, this is great. What exactly are you giving away? We are giving away tickets for the concert that's going to be upcoming. When I say upcoming, I mean in the middle of the summer. Wednesday, June 18th, Everwise Amphitheater at White River State Park. Fabulous band Dispatch. They are out of Vermont and kind of a jam band, but going to be a great show on June the 18th.
See, Jake, you just buried a potential trivia question because we gave that information away earlier in the week.
We did, and it was Jacob that won, correct?
Yeah.
So you rolled your eyes at that.
I was trying to think. Yeah.
Well, I remembered his name because he's got a great one. I'm not a Jacob though, but still.
Also, our listeners have learned we had some that called in and they quickly hung up because of the false start penalty.
Yeah, we don't award the early worm here. Did you shut off the phone lines, or simply nobody calling in right now because they're that disciplined, or nobody's listening?
They are disciplined.
Okay. Well, in just a couple of minutes, we will give away tickets at 239-1070, and then we will probably do a trivia question in 15 minutes or so. So we'll do it both ways. We'll do one just randomly if you're calling in, and the other one we will do to reward those that listen to the program. Eddie, last night, Pacers and Clippers out in L.A. Look, that got ugly early, and I hate to say it, I'll confess it, I did say at one point, this game's over. When they got down 22, and they were down 42-22 at the end of the first quarter, so they're down 20 at the end of the quarter break, and I really did think that the game was over, and then after that, second quarter was a totally different story. And Eddie, initially, it was really Pascal Siakam that kind of carried them through there at the outset of quarter number 2 and carried them really through 2 and 3 heading into the fourth quarter.
Yeah, that ended the first half where he hits the long 2, the 3, and a layup. He had like 10 or 11 points in like a 2-minute span, 3-minute span. I was just like, holy cow, it was just a barrage. It's just kind of how it felt what the Clippers did to the Pacers at the end of the first quarter, because it was just like haymaker after haymaker of three-pointer after three-pointer. LA hit 10 threes in the first quarter. Like, they could not miss. They were unconscious, and I don't know how many people watch the Clippers on a routine basis or follow them at all, but that's typically a Clippers game like last night. Either they are slow out of the gate or they are just scorching hot, and then they taper off or they heat up. Last night they tapered off, and a large part of that was because of Pascal Siakam and the energy that Thomas Bryant brought off the bench. And the first half, I thought he did a really good job of kind of calming the waters a little bit with T.J. McConnell. Ben Shepherd was critical in that first half, too, because the offense was sputtering, and he had 10 first-half points, I think. 10 or 12. In
various areas, right? Various ways. I mean, he hit mid-range. I think he had a couple of the corner. Shepherd, seemingly, Eddie, was the one guy that could knock anything down when nobody else could, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I thought the way the game closed was really, really encouraging for Benedict Mathurin, because, Jake, you and I talk about this off air sometimes. If you had just watched how the minutes were being allocated since Nesmith has been full return, his minutes have dipped. He had failed to play more than 25 minutes, and he wasn't on the floor at the end of games. Last night, Tyrese Halliburton couldn't get it going. He missed a couple shots. I think Siakam got a little tired at the end of the fourth quarter with just how many minutes he was playing, with Miles going out in the first half after playing 6 minutes. So they had to turn to somebody else, and that's the role that you have to hope Benedict Mathurin continues to thrive in, because when we were talking about this Pacers team last year in the postseason against the Boston Celtics, we're like, man, with Tyrese out, they were missing a guy like Ben who could just take over the game, create his own shot, and get to the line when the game was on the line.
I think the thing for Mathurin, what we saw last night, and it doesn't mean that it's a final product. It doesn't mean that the resolution has 100% been, completed. I guess that's kind of redundant from the first point. But when Benedict Mathurin was drafted here, there was so much expectation, because what do I always say? so much of the expectation of a player is based and rooted in how they were acquired and where they were acquired. I call it the Alex Smith rule. Alex Smith was a really good NFL quarterback and a solid quarterback. But Alex Smith was not if you had Alex Smith's career and you had taken him 21st overall, you'd say solid career, really good player, got the most out of himself. But because he was selected number 1 overall in the draft, and especially in San Francisco, there was the dip in, well, the guy was kind of a bust. Well, not really. Solid player. But because of how he entered the league, that's held against him a little bit. In Benedict Matherin's case, he comes in, and the Pacers are a franchise that obviously was not used to selecting in the single digits. Hadn't done so since George McLeod. And so there was all of this expectation of they're going to get the guy. They're going to get a franchise guy. Mm-hmm. And it was before they really knew that we knew for certain that Halliburton was going to also grow into that role. But Mathurin, even still, I remember going to a game shortly into his career here and watching him come off the floor after he'd hit a couple of big shots and saying, like, Mathurin is that guy, and he knows he's that guy. But when Halliburton really went on his rise, and then obviously with the acquisition of Siakam, then I think Mathurin had to say, no, wait a minute, I got two choices here. I can either be the guy that warrants where I was drafted and how I came here, but that doesn't necessarily help this team. If I go out and get 30 a night, that's not what I'm asked to do. What I'm asked to do is to know when it is my time to go and when is my time. You know, it's kind of like, to use a racing analogy, we just saw the 24-hour Rolex race, right? You got 4 guys on a team, or, you know, in terms of the driving shifts over the course of 24 hours, and you finish usually with, just like any sprint or any relay race, you finish with your strongest, and you probably start with one of your strongest. The guy that drives from midnight to 4 a.m., you know, he has to understand and accept, my job is still to keep the car up here, but also maybe to baby the car a little bit, to give feedback on how the car works in different situations. I have a different role than my anchor. And in the Pacers' case, in most games, Halliburton and or Siakam are your anchors. But Mathurin can be that guy, and last night he kind of was, because so he's got to know there are times where he's going to be called upon to be that finisher and other times where it has to be intermittent. And that's a very difficult role to not only learn and accept, but also to be able to have the consistency of expecting the inconsistent in terms of what number is being called for you. Very few guys really can do that, and we don't know that Mathurin can consistently be it, but I think it shows a lot about his maturity in the way that he has been able to adapt of what he probably expected his role to be from 2 years ago to now. Mm-hmm. And if, you know, Ron Harper on the 98, the great Bulls teams, I mean, it was Jordan Pippen, right? Ron Harper was a hell of a player, but Ron Harper was a guy that came in and in Cleveland, before the injury, was a rising star that was going to be a straw mixing the drink. He had to learn in Chicago how to be that third piece that at times could take over games, but at times had to reel back a little bit.
Mathurin had to change the way that he approached the game just because of the fact they added Siakam, because they didn't need him for his scoring anymore. They needed him to become a better defender and a better all-around player. It's taken some time, but last night you saw a little bit of the entire package with him, with his way to defend down the stretch. And then I think one of the better plays that he's had this season is when the shot clock was winding down, he drives to the basket, and the defense collapses, he kicks it out, and then Siakam hits a three.
You know, Mathurin, in terms of his last name, is my least favorite last name on the Pacers. You know why?
Because it's got math in it?
That's exactly correct, because it involves math. Can't go there, man. Can't go there. But I do know this. When it comes to math, if you dial the numbers right now, 239-1070, and you are caller number what, Eddie? We're going to give away tickets to the Dispatch Show, June 18th, White River, right here downtown at the amphitheater. What number caller are we going with?
We've got 2 pairs to give away, and since we're doing it show trivia style, I feel like we'll go in order of priority. So if you're first, you'll get the first crack at it.
Okay, but here's the thing. For this one, we're just going to go with first pair is simply going to be for a caller. Second pair will be in a couple of minutes. We'll do a little show trivia. But right now at 239-1070, line up for the tickets. We'll come back. We'll do a little trivia as well, and then Kevin joins us in 20. So, Eddie, you gave away a pair of tickets already, correct?
I haven't yet, Jake.
Well, that was the instruction.
I know. I'm a rebel.
Okay. So we're giving away a pair with via trivia, correct?
Yep.
And we have callers lined up. Now, here's the thing. We're going to do trivia style, and this is the way – these are the rules I make up as we go along, okay? And if you're just joining us on the program, by the way –
Where have you been?
We have talked about the Mike Woodson situation. I anticipate we'll get back into that with Kevin Bowen coming up here and in the 2 o'clock hour as well. It's a feel-good, good for the heart Friday. Got some really good information for you about your heart health coming up at 2:30, and I'll get more into what Franciscan is doing with us over the course of the year that I'm excited about. And obviously the Hall of Fame last night, Reggie Wayne, Adam Vinatieri not getting in. But the Pacers did get in a big win over the Clippers after being down by as many as 22, coming roaring back. Pascal Siakam with 33 last night. All right, these tickets are for June 18th at the Everwise Amphitheater at White River. That's right across from Victory Field downtown. It's going to be awesome because the summertime in general, it's great to be out there, and I guarantee you it's going to be a beautiful night. I can just tell that right now because that's the way summer is here. And Dispatch is cool, kind of just a jam band, perfect summer band. So it's going to be a good night. The way that we're going to do this, whatever caller it is that we decide to select on the air, and hopefully, and I'm hoping it's going to be you, when you get on the air, you will select either myself or Eddie, and either myself or Eddie will give you a trivia question of something that's happened on this radio program that pertains to the other. So if you are more knowledgeable about, say, myself, you would ask Eddie to give you a question. If you're more knowledgeable about Eddie, you would ask me to give you a question, etc. And we're trying to verify that you listen. Now, this is an uncomfortable thing because a lot of times we've done this, we find out nobody listens to this show, right?
But we have found out that everyone remembers everything about me.
Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Does that make me the more interesting of the two of us?
They only know that you have a 9 7/8 hat size, which you said yourself one time on the air. All right, who are we going with here, Eddie, for this captivating game?
All right, so the Pacers wrap up their 4-game West Coast trip tomorrow against the Lakers. They're 2-1, meaning they're going for win number 3 tomorrow, which means we will go to line 3 with Greg.
Greg, what's up?
Hey, what's going on?
Not a lot. Have you called the show before, Greg? You sound like a nice fella.
This is my first time.
Oh, really? Okay, well, we'll try to make this easy, Greg. If you don't mind me asking, can we play a little Get to Know Your Listener? I've had a lot of success with this. Kids in particular love this segment when we do this. Can I get to know your listener a little bit here with you?
Absolutely.
Greg, if you don't mind me asking, how old a fella are you?
I am 39.
39-year-old Greg. Okay, my quick math tells me that would be that you were a high school graduate somewhere around 2004. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that would be from what school, Greg?
Heritage Hills High School.
Heritage Hills. That's down in Santa Claus, Indiana, is it not?
Yes, right by it.
Did you go to school with Jay Cutler, or is he well before you?
He was a few years before me.
Okay. Did you ever get a chance, like around town, when he brought his playmate wife running around? Did you ever get a chance to see her there in Santa Claus?
I never met her, no.
Okay. Now, Santa Claus, Indiana. Now, is that near Holiday World, or is there a different amusement park that involves Santa Claus?
That's Holiday World and Splash and Safari, yes.
Okay. And did you ever work there as a kid or anything?
I did work there, yeah.
What did you do? Were you one of the animals? One of the mascots?
I was not one of the animals. I worked in the games department.
Oh, really? Any kids ever puke or anything like that?
Oh, no, nobody puked by me. So.
Which game did you operate, by the way?
There was like the ring toss and other stuff like that. The arcade, that was kind of cool.
Well, Greg, I appreciate that you listened to the program. I don't know how long you've been listening, but you heard the rules of the game. You can pick myself, which means you get a trivia question about Eddie, or you can pick Eddie, which means you get a trivia question about me. That would be Jake, by the way. Have you decided which way you'd like to go with this for the chance at the tickets, Greg?
Yeah, I think I'll go with Eddie's question.
Okay.
You want to go with my question about Jake? Okay. So this was just about what, Jake, 20 minutes ago?
Listen. Greg, have you been listening all day today?
Not all day. I'm in the car between places of work here.
Where we driving? Traffic okay? Everything going okay on the road?
I'm smooth. I'm just jumping off of the exit onto Campus Parkway off of 69.
Greg, 10 and 2, please. Safety is the top priority. Okay.
Sure. Hands free.
So, Eddie, if you want to give that question, that's fine, but it sounds like Greg may not know the answer because it was just divulged about 20 minutes ago.
Okay, since Greg is a first-time caller into the program, I'll try to give him an easy one.
Okay.
So Jake Query is a man of many different things. He likes to do a lot of things on the side. He gets called a creep and a weirdo for this particular item. Do you know what I'm referring to in terms of one of the hobbies of Jake Query? And it happens pretty frequently when he visits other cities.
Okay, so what things do I visit that people think's creepy?
Yes.
Okay. Greg, do you have a guess?
You go to is it schools?
Say that again?
Is it schools? Like I'm wrong.
No, well, hold on. Okay. How about a redo on this one, Greg, right? Because you've been a good sport, and I made you go all the way through Get to Know Your Listener. I'd hate to immediately dispatch you. I'm going to give you a chance for a redo. Okay?
Okay.
What is the name of my girlfriend?
Ooh. Man, I'm terrible at that.
Okay. What sport did Eddie play in high school?
basketball.
Oh, Greg, you're killing me, man.
I know, man. I'm sorry.
Greg, no, I appreciate it. Listen, I appreciate that you listen to the program, and I certainly encourage you to drive safe. I feel bad to send Greg all the way through that, but let's go one more. Who do we got, Eddie?
You can pick, Jake. Mine struck out.
I'll go with Gary. What is up, Gary?
What's up, fellas?
Gary, you sound like a fun guy. Have you called the show before?
I have.
Okay, and what do you do for a living, Gary, other than not turn down your radio in the background?
What do you say?
Now, what's the noise in the background?
Oh, I was leaving out of the house.
Oh, okay. Well,
What's going on? Go ahead.
Okay,
go ahead,
so
sir.
Gary, which trivia question would you like?
Sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, Eddie, I think I might know more about you, Jake.
Okay, so you would like a question from Eddie. Go ahead, Eddie. Give a question.
I'm going to re-ask the first question I just gave Greg. When Jake travels to different cities, he likes to visit an area in which it is found weird. He also visits this place in Indianapolis pretty frequently because he thinks it's one of the coolest spots around the city. If you were to visit this place, it's probably not in a good time of your life. That's the best way I can put it. Do you know or what I'm referring to in terms of a hobby that Jake likes to do?
What areas of a city do I visit?
Sound like the cemetery.
There we go. He got it.
Gary, you are correct, my man. Gary, I know you said you've called the show before. How old a fella are you?
I'm your age, man. 42. No, I'm 57.
Okay, and Gary, you attended what high school?
Thomas Carr Howe High School.
You know what? I love that campus, man. I think Howe is cool. The Howe Hornets, baby. Andre Smith was a dynamic guard for Howe when I was in high school, about 5 years after you. But Andre Smith was a hell of a player. Gary, stay on the line. We will get your information. We will send you on your way to the concert on June 18th.
I was trying to figure out a way how to not give it away and word it in a way that could lead someone to think of it. It was very hard.
Well, it is. First off, when you said, what is it that makes Jake creepy? I'm like, well, no, wait a minute. What are we doing here, right? I mean, we got to be a little bit careful. We got to tiptoe through the tulips. I mean, I'm not trying to be Tiny Tim, but come on. You know what I mean? I mean, come on.
Visit cemeteries for sure.
Last night, by the way, of those that got into the Hall of Fame, Eddie, were there any that surprised you? Were you more surprised by a particular player or more surprised that they only did 4 of them?
Ooh, I would say probably 4 because we went through the exercise yesterday. It felt like there were like 6 to 8 that were worthy of making it into the Hall of Fame. But Kevin will probably expound on this here in 7 minutes, just how the new Hall of Fame voting process works, on how you get enshrined is different. And I don't know. I think it's going to create a lot of controversy in terms of people not liking it because you had 6 for sure guys that were deserving and only 4 get in. I don't think it was surprising that Reggie didn't make it because you, Zach Kiefer, and myself all thought he wouldn't get in last night, but it was a little shocking that Anavan and Terry didn't.
It was. The Baseball Hall of Fame, I think, to most people is the one that is considered the gold standard, and that's because it is the most selective in terms of its entry. And the Basketball Hall of Fame is one that I'll be honest with you. Like the Basketball Hall of Fame to me, I'm not going to say it's not as credible, but like it does feel the most lenient. I mean, there are guys in the Basketball Hall of Fame. Now, the Baseball Hall of Fame, that changed a little bit with Harold Baines. Harold Baines was the boulder in the stream, and I really do think this. I think it's possible that because the Baseball Hall of Fame was seen as being too lenient by letting in Harold Baines, I think it's possible the Football Hall of Fame at that point, the Pro Football Writers said, you know what, let's be more selective, and let's get it to the point where it is, in fact, considered in this. We have a chance to pounce here and make up some ground. There are not a lot of areas where baseball would trump football, but the selectivity of Hall of Fame is one of them. And maybe now the Football Hall of Fame is trying to close that gap.
Let me ask you something real quick.
What's that? Yes, sir?
Were you surprised Josh Allen was named MVP over Lamar Jackson, considering Lamar was first-team All-Pro?
When is the voting done?
After the regular season and prior to the postseason.
because that's the thing. They beat,
I think it was the first time it was either
I was
20,
not-
21 years.
I was not surprised because I think Lamar Jackson is an unbelievable talent and certainly a very, very, would have been a worthy MVP. But he's won it before, and he had Derrick Henry. And I think that people are going to look at that and say, if you take Josh Allen away from Buffalo, who are they and what are they? Because it feels like he carried them a lot of games. Lamar Jackson's a great player. I mean, I would have been fine with it either way. We'll ask Kevin about that and more next. For us on a Friday, talked a lot about this at the outset of the show, but the Mike Woodson situation, as I mentioned earlier, last night, if you were watching the NFL Awards program when they were announcing the Hall of Fame inductees, they brought out Jared Allen, and then as they were introducing, I think it was either Antonio Gates or Sterling Sharp that was next, but the camera panned over and showed Eric Allen standing there with his tux on, and he was like, do I go now? And so you're like, oh, well, clearly Eric Allen got in. They just haven't announced him yet. So it kind of gave glimpse when they announced Eric Allen. It was almost like, yeah, we all knew that. And that's kind of what the Mike Woodson story yesterday felt like, because when it came out that Mike Woodson was in negotiation of how he was going to leave Indiana, I think those of us who have been around Indiana, and been discussing this for the last couple of weeks are like, yeah, we knew that was the case. And now it is, and I can tell you in discussions with people in the last, day or so, and you've heard me mention all the way back to before they went on the road, that if things did not go well, and they did play well at Purdue, but they didn't win, and then the way that they got boat raced at Wisconsin after the way that they had been beaten by Illinois and the crowd at home, I'd laid out for you a couple of weeks ago, if it gets to a situation where they're coming off of losing situations with Dusty May coming in, it's going to be very uncomfortable. And Indiana is going to have to probably hearken back to February 11th of 06 when Mike Davis and the Hoosiers were coming in on a losing skid with Steve Alford coming in, and Davis, of course, missed that game. And I've been telling you that for a couple of weeks now. And now here we are, and it is, I can tell you, unless there is a seismic shift in the direction, this is obviously Mike Woodson's last year. It then becomes a matter of whether or not Indiana, the way that they let him go, because you have to be delicate with that because of the optics, especially when you're offering it to somebody else and they're looking at how you handled a legacy guy that was a member of your program. But Indiana and Michigan up next now at Assembly Hall. The other thing that I just mentioned there was the NFL awards, and let's get to the Hall of Fame voting with Kevin Bowen, who joins us now. You hear him on the wake-up call with KB and Mark Dykton working with them now in the morning time. On the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line is where Kevin joins us. Kevin, Vinatieri and Reggie Wayne not getting their number called. Before we go to whether or not that was a surprise, let's go to this. The only 4 getting in. That's not unprecedented, but it was surprising. I thought that 5 would get in. What is the criteria here in terms of what is necessary for one to get into the Hall of Fame?
Yes, the criteria has changed. We are used to 5-man classes. It's actually a 3-man modern class. Sterling Sharp was a senior entry. So, they've changed it to where when you start to cut it down, and, we were used to the list of 15 finalists that Reggie Wayne, Adam Vinatieri were on. 15 goes to 10, 10 goes to 7, which is a change, and then 7, you then vote for 5 of that 7, and for the class to be compiled, you must get 80% of the vote. It's a little baseball-y, honestly, in how it has changed. So based off what, it sounds like happened, obviously you had the 3 that got in off of the 7. Vinatieri was one of them that did not. Sounded like he was really, really close, but did not. And then Luke Kuechly, I think Torrey Holt might have been another one. So, this is going to be a little getting used to. We're used to these 5-man classes. I think some people have complained that, the Hall of Very Good, that sort of phrase, you'd start to have a few guys each year kind of get in that way. And so they've decided to make a change. And, I guess it kind of makes sense, but I still thought Vinatieri should have gotten 80% of the vote.
Kevin, what's interesting to me, I was just talking about this. Baseball, if you look at the Baseball Hall of Fame, which has always been to me the gold standard of selectivity, right? Because baseball, there was no doubt. I mean, it was always the best usually the best player at his position for the totality of his career, very elite. When Harold Baines got in by the Veteran Committee vote a couple of years ago, matter of fact, I might have been on the show with you in the morning around that time, and we discussed it. To me, that was a watershed moment, because then it was like, wait a minute, Harold Baines, very good player, but I think most people would say not a Hall of Famer. It's almost like the NFL at that point saw like light coming through on a crack and said, you know what, let's take advantage of this and let's increase the selectivity of our Hall of Fame and kind of own that, because it's really that's the only area where baseball still had kind of trumped the other sports. Do you agree that there certainly was like a concern? I'm not saying it's related to that, but around that time seemingly is when the concerted effort was made.
Yeah, I just think you run into, and like next year is the exact opposite. So, but you ran into, I think, some classes here recently where you were like, really? Did you need 5 spots? Which, again, I think makes sense. Now, next year's class, I mean, hell, you might need 8 spots. I mean, it's incredible to look at the list of next year. I think it's one of the best ever. Your first balloters are obvious in 3, and Drew Brees and Adrian Peterson and Larry Fitzgerald. And then you can make strong cases off of Ben Roethlisberger and Phillip Rivers and Frank Gore and Jason Witten. And then obviously you have layovers from, this year. So, I mean, next year you're going to start with those 3, and then we'll see how much it gets played out. So, I understand the rationale, and I think largely it makes sense. But given that, I still thought Adam Vinatieri should have been a first-ballot Hall of Famer. If he plays any other position, he's unquestionably a first-ballot Hall of Famer. And I thought Eric Allen was simply a decision that, he's been on the ballot for so long, we need to put him in. And I think too much of that happens with the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
My concern for Reggie Wayne, Kevin, to put it simply, is he's in a traffic jam now, and to your point, there are more cars merging in off of the entry ramp, right? I mean,
Reggie Wayne isn't getting in the Hall of Fame for years. I mean, that's the impression I got. So let's play this out. I just laid out to you, Jake. Obviously Fitzgerald gets in next year. I don't see them putting Holt in. So then put Torrey Holt. Let's say he gets in 2027. I mean, you're looking at 2028 as the earliest for Reggie. And Mike Chappell, I think, has warned all of us, Reggie is still not getting into the top 10. Like, he didn't make the final 10 cut last night. So, if you're not getting into the final 10, and it's not like wide receiver numbers are going to diminish anytime soon. They're only going to increase, so the more and more, running backs is different. The Edgerrin James, whatever, and, even the Frank Gore resume is going to continue to look better. Running backs, I don't think you're going to have as many super, super quality candidates, whereas wide receiver, it'll be different. So I still think he's deserved it at some point, but last night was a little bit of a rude awakening, I think, for Reggie Wayne.
Frank Gore, to me, is a little bit – and this other guy was a better player, Kevin. But there's a little bit of LaDainian Tomlinson and Frank Gore in the fact that the longevity is what is so impressive. Gore was – I don't know that Gore you would ever say was the best back at any point that he was playing, but he was amongst the top 2 or 3 for such a long period of time. I don't know if he's a first balloter, but he's eventually going to get in, don't you think?
Yeah, I think longevity at running back matters so much.
I do,
I mean, at that position, it just matters more. I mean, hell, he's what? I think he's 3rd on the all-time list. I mean, you can't overlook that. And, he started to get into some years where, again,
he's probably more like a Curtis Martin. Curtis Martin's probably a pretty good comparison, right?
Yeah. I think I think that's kind of a fine way to put it. And again, you have some guys that are whatever, more in the Luke Kuechly's of the world, or again, they didn't play a ton, but they were all pros for seemingly every year they were in. Whereas Gore's a little bit different. It was the longevity at a position that doesn't call for that at all. I mean, I don't think Derek. I don't know who knows how much longer Derrick Henry's going to keep on playing, but I think Henry is still a ways off from passing Frank Gore on the all-time rushing list. So if Derrick Henry's not going to pass him, nobody's going to pass him. When you look at these modern-day backs, they're just not going to get to that level. So to me, Frank Gore will eventually get in. Again, I don't know first ballot. Probably not, but he will definitely get in.
Kevin Bowen, our guest, Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Kevin, you had an interesting column about Alec Pierce and A.D. Mitchell, and I guess the best way to say it, so I'll leave the floor to you here when I say it this way. Would you agree with this? The way Alec Pierce handled A.D. Mitchell is something that Chris Ballard probably should have thought about in terms of creating the same situation for others on the roster. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, I think that's pretty well said. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. At the end of the year, Alec Pierce was asked about, the drafting of A.D. Mitchell and, was that motivating? And, he kind of took the word motivating and he spun it and he goes, no, I think what it was is it created comfort for me. And I got back to being in a comfortable position. And, again, that word, you're kind of like, wait, what does he mean by that? But he explained it quite well. He was like, I am used to, whether it was high school and certainly college at Cincinnati, I was used to competition and felt like that's when I really was at my best, is when, no, there are some great, wideouts. Obviously, he had Sauce Gardner he went up against a whole lot at Cincinnati. But that's where he felt like when he really kind of stepped up and thrived. And, I think a lot of guys are like that. So he said in kind of a weird way, the drafting of Mitchell created a little bit more comfortability for him of like, okay, I'm now back in my competitive arena, if you will. And sure, you would like for him obviously to be, in that arena 24/7, 365, but he certainly was one of the few Colts that I think individually had a really promising season. And I think Chris Ballard could, look at that quote and listen to, his third year wideout and probably do a lot of good to practice that at other positions on the roster.
Kevin, if it were up to you and Scott Dolson, who is the athletic director at Indiana University, calls you on the phone and asks not who you think are the 5 most realistic coaching candidates. So in other words, I'm not asking you who you think Indiana will have on their list. The Kevin Bowen list would be who?
I'm going to call Shaka Smart. I know the Texas experiment didn't go great.
Boy, he's redeemed himself, hadn't he?
Say it again.
He's redeemed himself at Marquette. I love the way they play.
Yeah, and again, stylistically, I just think it's something that people kind of fear. They don't want to see that style. Stresses them out. It's obviously a high turnover pressure team. They get up and down the floor. So he would be one that, I know he went to college in Ohio. He's got a lot of Midwest ties. I know he's got a lot of Wisconsin ties, which I think would probably be the hard pull to get him out of that situation. But, he's a name that, again, it doesn't fall into the line of pretty much any of these lists that you're seeing. But, I just thought at times, did he get lost in that Texas is a little bit too football-y, and who knows? But I would say the resume would call for him to be a candidate again.
I was thinking about Chris Beard, Kevin, and I talked with Bob about this earlier, Bob Kravitz. But to me, Chris Beard, you have the situation at Texas with and I'm not making light in any way, shape, or form of the arrest for domestic violence, but the charges were dropped. The alleged victim then spoke on his behalf. Ole Miss gave him an opportunity. He's done well there. The thing about Chris Beard that I like, and I'm not saying that I'm overlooking those things, but if they went with that direction, he's a Bob Knight guy that admires Bob Knight, that coached under Bob Knight, that cut his teeth under Bob Knight, that exemplifies a lot of the schematics of Bob Knight, but he's not an IU guy. And I actually like that because I think it's time to kind of get away from the IU guy. And I'm not, I know Tom Crean wasn't, Archie Miller wasn't, but I just think you've got to separate altogether from trying to hold on to the link of the IU glory. And Chris Beard still appeases a little bit of that because of the Bob Knight thing, but it's Texas Tech Bob Knight, not IU Bob Knight. To me, that checks 2 boxes. You agree?
Yeah, I'm trying not to get lost in any sort of IU lore within any candidate. And really, to be fair, outside of Dusty May and Chris Beard, I don't know how many of them would even have anything on the resume. I guess Alford, if you went that route, that would have anything. But I think what is impressive about Chris Beard, and obviously Purdue fans saw it firsthand in the tournament, he has taken programs that have had, in Little Rock's case for a year, but certainly Texas Tech. Texas Tech is on the doorstep of a Final Four with them. They got to the championship then the next year with them. It's like, Texas Tech basketball, that's unheard of. And I think looking back on hindsight, of course, it's 2020, but there is an element with Archie Miller. It's like, well, everyone wanted Dayton. And, how much of it was, him really building a program up. And, not that IU is certainly at rock bottom by any means, but I think that's what's impressive.
It's at IU's rock bottom.
Say it again?
It's at IU's rock bottom.
Well, yeah, but, obviously resource-wise or, Tom Crean would he'll be on line 1 if you want to hear what rock bottom looks like, or at least,
right.
what he had to deal
you're
with.
right. You're right.
In 2008, obviously, what he did at Ole Miss last year, where Ole Miss is tracking this year. You want to talk pure basketball coach, it's probably hard to argue with anyone besides Beard. And, obviously they'll have to do their homework from the domestic standpoint. But, again, charges were dropped, as you said. So that is probably the one. Yeah, I feel like from my IU friends, I feel like that's the name that I hear the most.
Well, they're going to call Brad Stevens first, right? I mean, they're going to make Brad Stevens say no. And then, and that conversation might be longer than it's been in the past, from what I understand. I'm not saying he takes it. And then you are going to insist that they do not call South Bend, correct?
Yes, I would be very, very happy if they did not. Now, of course, some IU fans might look at the Micah Shrewsbury resume and say, is that the path that we have to go down? Obviously at Penn State, did a nice job getting in the second round, but so far at Notre Dame, you haven't had that. Granted, he's taken very much the approach of we'll do little in the portal and we'll kind of build it high school wise, a la Matt Painter, which I actually kind of agree with. I think at Notre Dame you have to do a little outside of the box thinking. So I am a fan of it, even though it's certainly practicing patience here early on. Do you get into some of these other names of does Scott Drew have any sort of pull back to the state? And I don't, he, by all accounts, sounded like he said no to Kentucky and Louisville. Altenberger at Iowa State, he's done a nice job there. Obviously, there's not been a ton of success there. Is that a guy that you would look into? Bruce Pearl, by all accounts, has always had a huge affinity for the Indiana job. Certainly you're going to have to do your homework on him off the floor as well. Would age, influence you at all? But again, you're talking pure basketball coach, hard to argue with that resume. So more than anything, I just think Pam Whitten's got to tell Scott Dolson, you run it. Our board of trustees will stay out of it, and you've earned the right with the hire of Kurt Cignetti. He was very diligent with the Cignetti thing. He was adamant about, hey, we need to have a criteria in place of a guy that has, first off, a guy that's been a head coach with a winning record, a guy that, was on the offensive side of the ball, and the quarterback position was kind of what they were hoping for. Had a little bit of recruiting background, which, again, is something that he wanted. And, there are not many that check that box, but Cignetti was one of them. And so I think Scott Dolson in this case, not have Quinn Buckner over his shoulder with this search, I think he's earned that.
Kevin, Bruce Pearl, I've been around Bruce Pearl a couple times on Radio Rows and things like that, all the way back really to, I think the first time I met him was when he was at USI in Evansville. Being around Bruce Pearl for a couple of minutes is kind of like what you felt like after you would do the morning radio show with me. And the fact that you probably had two things going through your mind. Number one, like, man, I love this guy's charisma and energy, and I want to spend a lot of time with him, but I've got to immediately go home and shower. That's pretty much how you feel when you're around Bruce Pearl, right? Which is pretty much how you felt around me, I would assume, right?
Yeah, I'd say the only difference is, thankfully, and I apologize for doing this, I don't think you ever removed your shirt, and all I can think about is when Bruce Pearl went painted chest in the Tennessee student section for the women's game.
I do remember that.
Like, when I think of Bruce Pearl, that's the only image.
Listen, we did radio when I saw you remove your shirt, and that's tough as well, right?
Very tough. Yeah. I mean, no one, yeah. I mean, it's a miracle that Maddie has seen it for, a few times that she has seen it over the years. Nonetheless, she has seen it.
The few times that she's seen it. Okay,
mm-hmm. Well. Yeah. Sorry.
There are two kids, so yes. Okay.
All right, well.
Kevin, lastly, I'm going to bring you into this debate that I had at the beginning of the week. I'm going to present to you a ridiculous hypothetical, and I want you to, with all objectivity, answer this question with honesty, okay? Peyton Manning never has the issue where he gets released from the Colts. Peyton Manning has a career with the Indianapolis Colts. He is a beloved, obviously still a beloved figure, but he retires a Colt, and he is a still prominent part of the community of Indianapolis, just as he is in Denver right now. We saw during the Pro Bowl that he had his son there, Marshall Manning, who I think is probably a 7th grader, maybe an 8th grader now. He'd be like 12 or 13 years old. I caught some heat because I very flippantly sent a tweet that said, yeah, this kid should be getting ready to start as like the freshman quarterback at blank school, except for, well, you know what happened. What school would Peyton Manning's son be playing for if he was living in Indianapolis?
Yeah, I think you and I have talked about this before. I think you've gone the Park Tudor route, right?
Yes. Did we discuss this last week on the air? We might, or it was off air. I can't remember.
No. I think honestly, just back in the day, you and I have, me having to entertain your mind during the breaks, which was always quite the activity.
Uh-huh.
Now I got it every day, Kevin.
I was going to say, I know I've added Eddie Garrison to the prayer list.
Derek Schultz runs a group therapy on Sundays at 3, as I understand it. By the way, just so you guys know. But okay, so what would your answer be, Kev?
Well, I mean, not to get into a high school football program debate, and obviously I went to Cathedral, but I mean, Park Tudor's too small of a school, right? I mean, from a competitive standpoint, wouldn't he want Marshall at a little bit of a, I would think a little bit more of a competitive football program, not to have our Park Tudor football alums.
But here's the thing,
chiming in. So I seemingly half the Colts play for Westfield or Zionsville, or again, I don't know if the Cathedral part if he would have stayed at the Colts, would Jack Doyle have left a nice impression enough on him to go? I think Jack Doyle helps out the Cathedral football team, so I don't know. Maybe he would have gone there.
So I called Eric Ritchie, who most people in this area know, used to be at Fox 59, good dude, and he's been in New Orleans forever now. He left from Indianapolis to go to New Orleans. Because I was curious if Isidore Newman, which is where Peyton Manning played, Cooper Manning played, and Eli Manning played, and Arch Manning played. And Eric told me that Isidore Newman, which is a K through 12 private school, $28,000 a year, and they play in Louisiana. They have 2 classes. They have the public school class and the private school class. And then in the private school class, it goes 4, 3, 2, 1, 4 being the same thing as here, 4 being the biggest, whatever. Isidore Newman is a Class 2 school in the private class, so in the second group. So very, very small school. And he told me that Manning has always, when he goes back to Isidore Newman, talked about the benefit he got from going to a school that was known for academics and not necessarily for the football aspect of it. So that's part of why I say Park Tudor.
Got it. Well, Westfield's
probably a pretty good call, too, though. Westfield's not a bad call.
Yeah. I mean, we don't really have a lot of, obviously if you look at the Catholic private schools, I mean, from an enrollment standpoint, Cathedral's about 1,300. Garin and Chittard play at the class, class, a little bit lower, 800, 900. So I don't know if those schools are huge, but, we don't have many Park Tudor equivalents.
Right.
I mean, I don't, so that's, and you and I have talked about this before. I always think it's interesting that, you look at Louisville, Cincinnati, and St. Louis, they're flooded with all boys and girls high schools.
No question. St. X and Moeller and all that, right?
Yeah, we obviously did back in the day, but we don't have any anymore. So, yeah, that's maybe start a program at University High School. Maybe Peyton would have become the coach and all of a sudden take over University High School's football program.
Listen, I realize it's a ridiculous conversation, but I do think it's fascinating, right? The what could have been had he stayed in Indy. I know that right now he is in Cherry Creek School, which is like basically Carmel. Cherry Creek is kind of like the Carmel or Westfield of Denver. Super nice area. Big weekend plans, Kev? Anything exciting?
Not much, really. No, I mean, nothing.
Big game on Sunday,
really.
Right?
Correct. Yes, big football game on Sunday. Yeah, a little dance class for Rosie, some swimming. Yeah, nothing crazy.
All right. Is your son doing a Super Bowl pick?
Yeah, we got to get those helmets out. Yeah. I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Yeah, Eagle. Yeah, I mean, you got to think he'll go Eagles. Although I think the Chiefs helmet looks cool, but
it does.
The Eagles, obviously gets into the animal world, which fascinates him.
All right, Kevin, enjoy the Super Bowl. Obviously, enjoy the weekend as well. Appreciate it.
All right, boys. Have a great weekend.
Kevin Bowen, Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. We come back. I want to kind of recount this for everybody, and I really am grateful to the great folks at Franciscan Health. We did this a year ago, the Franciscan Health Feel Good, Good for the Heart Friday, and I have always enjoyed doing it. Next Friday, I've got a great story that I was actually scrolling on Facebook, and I saw a photo of a guy that I've known for a long time, who's been on the show before, who's a coach. And in this photo, he was with a youngster, and it caught my eye, and I called him and said, hey, tell me more about this photo. And he told me the story behind it, and I actually got emotional listening to him. And maybe we'll get emotional talking about it. but that's going to kick things off for us next week for the Franciscan Feel Good, Good for the Heart Friday. I would love for you folks, if you have a story that you notice in your community, whether it be at the local high school, the middle school, the student manager that gets an opportunity to play for the first time, somebody that comes back from an injury. You know the kinds of stories I'm talking about. The stories of those in triumph and glory and feel good that are not those that are of the mainstream kid that gets all the attention and all the glory on the regular basis. Those are the stories that I want to highlight. We did it all last year, and this is, of course, in February. It is, Heart Health Month here in this country, and so want to talk to you about that and kick off another year. Thank you to Franciscan Health and their efforts to get everybody, especially those in my age range, heart healthy and heart conscious. And we're going to do that on the other side, and then we'll get back into talking about the Super Bowl and what we expect to happen on Sunday here before we hand it off to John at 3 on this Friday edition, Query & Company on the Fan. Friday, it is midway through the 2 o'clock hour, and this is what that's going to mean again for 2025. And I am thrilled, happy, and honored to be able to do this, continuing with Franciscan Health. And that is Feel Good, Good for the Heart Fridays. If you folks have been listening to this program for a while, you would know that last year what we did was simple. And I'm always looking for any sort of listener contribution to this. If you know of a feel good, good for the heart story in the world of sports, I would love to know about it. You can simply text me. I think most people have my cell phone number by now. It's 317-523-9288. That's 317-523-9288. You can also email me. The station email is fine, jake.query@radio-1.com. That's kind of a lot to remember, I realize. jake.query@radio-1.com. But I'm talking about the stories that are beyond sports in terms of, the student manager that finally gets an opportunity to get out in the basketball game and hits a big three-point shot, or the student that has been working hard to come back from some sort of a debilitation or an injury or something that happened to them that made it difficult to participate in sports, but they have made the best of themselves, the best version of themselves. Those are the stories I want to tell. I have a great one to tell you next week, for example, about a guy in town who was a coach, met a kid, said he fell in love with the kid right away because of what the kid was trying to accomplish. And then that kid brought along to a practice session a young girl that reached out to the coach, grabbed his hand, and he said it changed things forever, and it is changing the lives for young people here in central Indiana, and I can't wait next Friday to tell you about that. We do it each and every Friday, brought to you by Franciscan Health. A reminder, the #1 heart program in Indiana for cardiology by health grades, and #1 in Indiana for interventional coronary care and major cardiac surgery by CareChex. Franciscan Health offers affordable heart scans. CareChex says they're #1. I agree. Franciscan Health offers affordable heart scans for just $49. You can self-refer, pay out of pocket, and get a free heart health risk assessment included with every screening. You cannot afford to not get the scan. Just $49. And again, it is very simple. It's non-invasive, and it is the first step towards taking control of your cardiovascular health. You do not want to go through, folks, what I've been through in terms of a heart attack. I'm doing everything I can to make sure that people are aware of their heart health. You can always find it online, franciscanhealth.org/screening bundles. That's franciscanhealth.org/screening bundles, or call 833-238-0688 to schedule your appointment. Again, you can also always text me, and I will get you the information on that heart scan. But for this Friday, as opposed to, or I should say in addition to, talking about the feel-good stories for heart health, we're going to talk quickly with a doctor from Franciscan Health about some of those things that in particular you men and women might hear about but not know about when it comes to your heart health. Dr. Mark Gerdish, and believe me, when you are a sportscaster for a living, sometimes these titles can trip you up. So I hope, Dr. Gerdish, that I'm going to say this correctly, but you are the Chief of Surgery for the the Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery for Franciscan Health Indianapolis. I got that correct. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Well, with my intellect level, that's a challenge, so I appreciate that. But essentially what that means is this. We know that Franciscan is the leader when it comes to heart health, both preventatively and in coming back from it. And, there are a lot of buzzwords that I think people hear: heart murmur, heart valve disease, things like that. And I wanted you to kind of just illuminate for the listeners exactly what those are and what the roadmap may look like for those that are entering in to that journey. So with that, I appreciate your time, but the floor is yours in talking about, in particular, heart valve disease.
Well, thank you so much. I think that it's a great segue in because so many people are told at some point in their life that they have a murmur, and a murmur in your heart is almost invariably, almost always, due to abnormal flow through one of the heart valves. And the heart valves are the doorways the blood goes through, going from one chamber to the next in the heart. And those doorways are meant to open one way and then close and not leak. So they're supposed to open well and close well. If they do not, then patients develop murmurs, and they also develop dysfunction of their hearts, and over time, eventually will develop symptoms. So there's this kind of broad spectrum of kind of mild and moderate valve disease, and then as you progress toward more severe disorders, not only can they develop symptoms, but perhaps even more importantly, without even developing symptoms, folks can have changes in the function of their heart, and we like to get to that before that functional change becomes something permanent. So that's the heart valves. And intervention or therapy for heart valves has evolved so much in the last couple of decades. It's really stunning. And I've been fortunate enough to be part of that at multiple levels, and our institution is extremely advanced in the management of heart valve disease. But now we have this kind of very broad spectrum of ways to manage problems with heart valves. And it really does go back as far as 20 years ago when we first started doing minimally invasive valve surgery. In other words, doing heart surgery through small incisions to treat the heart valves. It's a practice that we've cultivated over the last couple of decades. We've become very skilled at and can approach most valves that way. But at the same time, there was the merging of a technology called transcatheter valve therapy, which is where we can treat a valve without opening the chest, without being on the heart-lung machine, without stopping the heart. So those therapies have flourished as well in tandem with our minimally invasive practices. And the minimally invasive surgery was, it took a while for us to really understand just how much we could change the course of recovery for patients. But we recognized after a few years that folks could come in, have a minimally invasive valve operation, a mitral repair, an aortic valve replacement or repair, and even treat their aneurysm disease in their aorta, the big vessel that is on top of the heart. And we could have them back on their feet and out the door quickly with very little discomfort, as we had kind of mastered some techniques for managing discomfort around the time of surgery with specialized nerve blocks. And our anesthesiologist became specialized in introducing medication into the fascial planes and muscles of the chest. So we got to the point where folks really could be out of the hospital in a couple of days. And most importantly, they would just go home. They wouldn't go to an extended care facility. They wouldn't need help. So our journey then turned toward, could we do the same thing for the people that we had to do the standard heart surgery incision for? So people are all aware of a sternotomy, the incision down the middle of the chest. And we really changed the entire experience for folks who need that, whether we divide only part of that bone or we divide the entire bone. We advanced a methodology for stabilizing that bone orthopedically and managing discomfort to the point now where our median time to extubation, in other words, the time it takes to get somebody off the ventilator after heart surgery, open heart surgery, our median time is 0 hours, which means most of our patients leave the operating room after open heart surgery not on a ventilator.
Dr. Mark Gerdish is our guest, or my guest. He is the chief of cardiothoracic surgery for Franciscan Health Indianapolis. Doctor, when you talk about heart valve disease, it's amazing, right? I mean, the technology, the ability that somebody could be driving home within, a day, 2 days, whatever it may be, is incredible. But when you talk about a candidate for this and somebody that has heart valve disease, do you find more often than not that these patients are symptomatic and that's how you discover this? Or is it discovered more routinely and perhaps it's a silent, thing that's happening with somebody and they're not aware of it? How does one know if they are a candidate for this sort of procedure?
You just proven yourself insightful because it is so important that people be aware of their valve disease before they get symptomatic, especially, interestingly enough, especially folks that are particularly healthy, because they have more physiologic reserve. They can have changes in their heart that they're unaware of, and it doesn't come to light until there have been these changes. So as soon as someone has a murmur, or if you have, for example, a family history of congenital valve disease, anybody with a murmur, anybody with a family history of congenital valve disease should have an echocardiogram. So if anybody detects a noise in your heart, you should have an echocardiogram, which is where they take a probe and they put it on the chest and introduce sound waves into the chest. Those sound waves give us pictures of the valves and the heart, and that will tell us if it's a minor problem or an important thing. So, and the truth is that once we see something with a valve, it has to be followed. So if we look at folks who have a very common disorder, for example, is mitral valve prolapse, I assure you that 20% of the people in your audience have either heard of it or been diagnosed with it. 5% of those people will go on to have significant mitral valve disease. But if it's moderate, if there's a moderate leak associated with it, 50% of those people will go on to require something done for it. So, and the patient doesn't know that, and they may not have much in the way of symptoms. So anytime there's a noise, a murmur identified in the heart, it should be studied. It should be studied with echocardiography at a minimum, and then there are sometimes other studies that need to be done. To answer your question more precisely, no, people don't always have symptoms. Yes, if they have a murmur, it needs to be evaluated. Sometimes they first present with those symptoms, though.
And lastly, doctor, a murmur and AFib. Now, I know AFib is, and I'm going to put it in layman terms here, I know no other terms, is an acceleration or an unusual, if I'm not mistaken, pacing of the beat of the heart is AFib. How is that different, or is that simply a different name for what we know as a heart murmur?
No, it's also a great question and very important. AFib has been kind of oddly left out of the equation for a long time. It's something that I've actually dedicated a segment of my career to and trained folks from all over the world on how to manage it in the operating room. I learned it from the father of the operation for that, a fellow by the name of Jim Cox, who's a very good friend of mine, who invented the Cox-Maze procedure, and that's kind of the ultimate therapy for AFib in the operating room. And atrial fibrillation is a common consequence of valve disease. So people who have valve disease, especially mitral valve disease, but any valve disease, are more prone to having atrial fibrillation, so much so that about a third of the people who have a therapy for their mitral valve, whatever that might be, especially surgery, about a third of them have atrial fibrillation, and it has to be treated at the time of the operation. We have very powerful data that shows that if we ignore it, the survival is not as good. So it is an irregular rhythm. It is not a murmur. It is a change in the organization of the electrical impulses in the upper chambers of the heart. And when a person is in atrial fibrillation, those upper chambers no longer squeeze synchronously. They look kind of like a bag of worms. And there's a couple of layers of bad news with that. One is the blood stagnates in the atrium and can stagnate in what's called the left atrial appendage, and that's where you form clot, and the clot can break off and go to the brain and cause strokes. So atrial fibrillation causes strokes. The other thing that atrial fibrillation causes, though, even if they don't have any issues with clotting and strokes, is it causes heart failure. So people, if there's any opportunity to get people out of atrial fibrillation, not have them stay in it, then we should be pursuing that. Atrial fibrillation can exist independent of valve disease. It just happens to be prevalent in valve disease. And when we treat people for valve disease who have that irregular rhythm that makes them prone to strokes, that makes them prone to heart failure, we should treat it at the time of the operation, and we have a good procedure to do that.
Dr. Mark Gerdish, again, is the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Franciscan Health Indianapolis, with tremendous information, continuous progress in these groundbreaking stuff, really. And folks, you're going to hear me talking a lot about it over the course of the year, each and every Friday, and we will hear from doctors throughout the course of the year as well, with the latest from Franciscan in being preventative and in making sure that you are bouncing back should you have any sort of, like myself, cardiovascular health issues. Doctor, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the information and certainly the work, and look forward to talking to you over the course of the year, and have a wonderful weekend, all right?
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity. Have a great day.
The full interview with Dr. Gerdish, by the way, available podcast center at 1075thefan.com. Again, next Friday, really looking forward to telling you a story that, as I was talking to the individual it involves, all I could think to myself was, A, I was kind of choked up, and B, I can't wait to share this with our listeners. That's next week as we kick off another year of Good for the Heart, Feel Good Friday, brought to you by Franciscan Health. We'll come back, put a tie on all of it, hand it off to John, and get you set for his show and going into the weekend on this Friday edition, Query & Company, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. Eddie Garrison, I would like to know your plans for the weekend.
It's a good question. I've got 2 broadcasts tonight for IndianaHighSchoolSports.com at Ben Davis girls basketball sectional play. So I'll have that tonight. Pacers tomorrow afternoon, 4 o'clock against the Los Angeles Lakers. And I'm working both Saturday and Sunday.
And it looks like, if you are just joining us on the program, by the way.
Where have you been?
Eddie, you had mentioned this earlier. The Pacer game against the Lakers. Now, that was, and allow me kind of a 2-part question here.
Mm-hmm.
The NBA, to put it in NFL terms, they flexed that game to national television with the anticipation that Luka Doncic would be making his debut with the Lakers, right?
Correct.
But J.J. Redick says he pulled a Lee Corso and said, "Not so fast, my friend."
Yep.
Now, did they change the time of that game, or did they simply change where it was airing?
Just change where it was airing. The time of the game was always at 4 o'clock on Saturday. So ESPN booted, I think it was Houston, maybe? Houston and Colorado. I think that was the game that was on ESPN that were scheduled there, and it got bumped over to ESPN2.
Colorado?
Mm-hmm.
What, an NBA game?
College basketball?
Oh, college. Okay, sorry. I thought you meant, I was like the Rockets and Nuggets?
No, it was Florida-Auburn. Florida-Auburn got moved from ESPN to ESPN2 because of this game.
So they're going to be like, all right, we'll see. And did you see LeBron just became, the oldest player to score 40 in a game, right?
Yes.
So he is now the youngest player in NBA history with a 40-point game and the oldest player in NBA history with a 40-point game. It's pretty impressive, right?
Yeah.
But Luka Doncic looks like it is going to be Monday that is his. Now, is that because they're still trying to get him to lose weight? What's going on there? Like, what's the holdup?
He's hurt. He's been dealing with an injury since Christmas. I think it's his calf, maybe calf or an ankle. It's a lower body injury for Luka. So the initial belief when he was with Dallas, he would be back on the 8th. But now that he's in LA, they have decided to wait an extra couple days. Probably let him get acclimated and practice a little bit with his new teammates, and then throw him out there.
I would like to know your Super Bowl plans.
To be determined still. I'm working till 5, and then got to figure out if I'm just going to stay at home and watch it, even though Olivia states that it's not going to be on the TVs at the household of ours, or if I make the drive over to my parents. Now, is that because
she's fatigued by the NFL or because she's fatigued by the teams that are playing?
By the teams that are playing. She does not care for Nick Sirianni or Jalen Hurts or Patrick Mahomes.
Why would you not like Jalen Hurts?
I don't know. She says she doesn't like Jalen Hurts.
Pretty likable guy, don't you think? What is Jalen Hurts' hometown? Do we know? I know that obviously he started at Alabama and then went to Oklahoma. But Alabama is a national brand. He could be from anywhere. If you could, look up his hometown for me, Eddie, and then
Houston, Texas.
Is that where he's from?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
By the way, you go Houston or Houston?
Houston.
I hear people go Houston. I'm like, there's no why? Come on now.
Deranged. It's Houston. Houston, Texas. Which, by the way, if you've never been to Houston, Texas, it is I believe now it's the second or third largest metropolitan area in the United States. And it is literally the biggest sprawling area with no definitive epicenter. It literally looks like, if you're driving on 465 and you go past Keystone at the crossing,
sure.
And it's, you've got like a high-rise Marriott and then several office buildings and a mall and whatever else in that area. If that were the analogy I've always given, if that were a droplet of water that created that little business area there, or like the Park 100 area, if you took a paintbrush and dipped it in water and then just flung it over like a 50 square mile area and literally dropped 250 of those little Keystone at the Crossing areas, that's Houston, Texas. There's no there's like 2 downtowns to it. It's massive. And the thing about Houston that is amazing now is NRG Stadium, which is the size of Lucas Oil Stadium, is right next to the Astrodome, and the Astrodome looks like Mackey Arena next to it. I mean, the Astrodome at the time that it was opened, the Astrodome was it was the 8th wonder of the world. and you see it now, and you're like, this place is tiny. And it's just sitting there, and they're trying to figure out what to do with it.
What about you, Jake? What's your Super Bowl Sunday plans?
I'm still going to maintain, and I'm going to go with this. I've jostled back and forth on this, but now I'm getting a very strong sensation. They're going to call tails. It's going to be tails, and the team that wins is going to defer. We're just going to watch it. I mean, I'm not going to. While I appreciate people that have Super Bowl parties and that kind of thing, I oftentimes just want to just kind of chill out and relax and whatever else. But I think in this game, and I'm not saying this to buck the trend of what would be the wave of momentum, but as I've gone back and forth and looked at this, I think both teams have outstanding offenses, obviously. I think Philadelphia has the ability. I don't know that Saquon Barkley is going to be able to he's not a salt clock guy in my mind, but I think Philadelphia has the superior defense of the two. And for that reason, I think Philadelphia wins. I think the Eagles will win the Super Bowl. J&V has arrived. I saw that you were with our buddy Mark James this morning,
It was awesome
right?
today. I went this morning at 5:15 and played 2 hours to pick up basketball over there, too.
In Monrovia,
with
right?
a group at Monrovia, yeah.
So how was your nap last night?
I did not sleep last night. I stayed up until 1 a.m. for the Pacers, and then I couldn't really go to sleep, and I got up at 3:30 and took a 125-degree shower for 20 minutes to get loose and drove over to Monrovia and waited in the parking lot.
Get loose. To get loose.
I got good and loose, but I haven't been to sleep yet.
What's on the big show today, John? J&V
Carson
has arrived,
Steele is
by the
going
way.
to join us from New Orleans right off the top from the Chiefs. We'll talk to him for a minute about what he's doing down there. Chad Buchanan, Pacers GM, is going to join us coming up at 4:30. Is Eddie Gill coming on today? Eddie Gill is in L.A. too. He's going to join us. And Don Fisher about tomorrow.
I have a dumb question for you.
Yeah.
Is Carson Steele on the active roster for the Super Bowl, or do they? Okay.
Yeah, he played the title game.
Well, I knew, but he's gone kind of back and forth, hasn't he, over the course of the year?
I think he's been active unless I'm wrong. I think he's pretty much been active every week, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has been pretty much ever since Pacheco's injury.
Right. Okay, that's what it is, yeah. Great story, though, for sure.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, they added Kareem Hunt, and obviously they had P. Ryan.
I was asking on the air, John, and somebody pointed out, I believe, is it Rick Strife might have been the other one, but Eric Moore at Center Grove, if Kansas City is to win it, could see a former player win the college football national championship and a former player win the Super Bowl within like 2 weeks of each other.
It's amazing.
And there's not a lot of guys who can say that. That's for sure. Right?
I just talked to Eric here about 12:30, 1 o'clock. We talked about Carson and talked about Austin Booker, who plays for the Bears, and the program that he puts
Super
together
nice
down
dude,
there.
Eric Moore.
Yeah, Eric Moore is a great example of what you need to be in this era of sports, and that's everybody pushing in the same direction. And all the way down from first grade all the way up through his program, everybody's pushing in the same direction, and that is a rarity.
I mean, the youth foundation, the youth sports foundation at a school is a massive, massive thing in trying to build a program.
It's too full of jackasses for one, and he weeds out jackasses.
Can you imagine, like,
trusts lieutenants to guide what's best for the program?
The parents in general that you'd have to deal. I'm not saying at Center Grove. I'm saying in general with
youth
sports and all that.
Yeah.
Just
in general, parents are dumbasses. I think they know that.
All right, so John's up next. We will be back with you at Monday. We have plenty to talk about, obviously recapping college basketball, what happens in Bloomington, Purdue taking on USC. We'll recap the Pacers, Lakers, and the Super Bowl, of course.
Bloomington?
What's that?
Dusty May going to Bloomington tomorrow?
That's my understanding.
No, I don't mean going down. I mean for this Michigan team. Yeah.
That's my understanding, right?
Yeah.
As I said, the banners are dusty, and so too is the opposing coach coming up this weekend. All right, John's up next. We'll be back with you at noon on Monday. Thank you for listening to Query & Company.